He laughed first. That's the part nobody talks about afterward. Not the cameras, not the video, not the million strangers who watched it from their phones. They talk about what Lucian did, what he said, how he pulled out her chair like she was the only woman in the room. But Rafe laughed first, loud enough that the table beside him went quiet, loud enough that a busboy near the kitchen doorway looked up from his tray, loud enough that Nora Bellamy, standing just inside the entrance of Crown Meridian Restaurant, with rain still on her coat and doubt already eating through her chest, heard it and knew, without a single word being spoken, exactly what kind of night this was going to be. She almost left. She should have left. If you've ever walked into a room and felt the laughter before you understood the joke, if you've ever understood the joke, if you've ever been the joke, then you already know what the next few hours of Nora's life felt like. Stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. For her, for him, and for the three people who thought they were clever enough to arrange it. Before you go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is where we tell the stories that stay with you long after you've turned off the screen. Hit the like button if you're already feeling something, and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that Friday night in Chicago, because nothing about what happened was supposed to end this way. The storm came in off Lake Michigan the way Chicago storms always do, without apology, without warning, just a sudden drop in temperature, and then the sky opening up like it had somewhere better to be. Nora Bellamy stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 6:40 that evening and told herself three things. She told herself she looked fine. She told herself this was just dinner. She told herself she wasn't nervous. Two of those three things were lies, and she knew which ones. The dress was dark green not because she loved it, but because her neighbor Patricia had held it up outside the fitting room 8 months ago and said, "This one. This is the one." Nora had bought it mostly to end the conversation. She hadn't worn it since. The tags had still been on it at 4 o'clock that afternoon when she pulled it from the back of her closet and stood there holding it for a long moment, trying to remember the last time she'd had a reason to dress up for anything that wasn't a school play or a pediatrician appointment. She couldn't. Her daughter Maisie was 9 years old and already more certain of herself than Nora had been at any point in the last decade. That night, Maisie had sat on the edge of the bathroom counter, swinging her feet and watching her mother put on mascara with the focused expression of someone supervising an important project. "You should do the lip color too," Maisie said. "I'm doing the lip color. The pink one, not the one that looks like you're not wearing any." "This isn't a negotiation, Maisie. I'm just saying." Maisie leaned forward and propped her chin in her hands. "You look pretty, Mom. You just don't look like you believe it yet." Nora had set down the mascara wand and looked at her daughter in the mirror. 9 years old. Where did a 9-year-old learn to say something like that? Then she remembered Maisie had grown up, watching her mother walk into rooms already apologizing for being in them. Children learn what they observe, the good and the terrible. "I'll do the pink one," Nora said. Maisie gave a single nod of satisfaction, like a tiny executive approving a proposal. Patricia, from next door, was on the couch by 7, already settled in with the television remote and a bowl of something that smelled like microwave popcorn. And Maisie was mid-sentence about a book she'd been reading when Nora kissed the top of her head and made it to the door. "Mom," Maisie called. Nora stopped. "Don't let anyone make you feel small, okay?" The words followed her all the way to the cab. She didn't know how she'd been chosen for the date. A man named Rafe Calder had reached her through a mutual acquaintance, someone from the community writing group she attended on Thursday evenings, with a message that a friend of his was looking for someone genuine. Someone's interesting, someone who wasn't trying to perform her way through life. He'd been flattering in the way that made Nora slightly suspicious, but her friend Denise had told her to stop being so guarded and just go. "You haven't been on a date since Obama was still in office," Denise had said, which was an exaggeration, but not a severe one. So Nora had said yes. She hadn't asked what the man did for a living. She hadn't asked his last name, which she'd later think was either the most careless thing she'd done in years or a mercy, because if she'd known the name Vercetti before she walked through those restaurant doors, she would have turned the cab around and gone home and locked every deadbolt she owned. Crown Meridian was not the kind of place Nora went on a regular Tuesday. It was the kind of place she'd passed on the street and glanced through the window at. From a distance, the warm amber lighting, the white tablecloths, The quiet that suggested the noise had been designed out of the building entirely. The kind of quiet that costs money. The hostess smiled at her with the polite wariness of someone trained to be welcoming, but also trained to understand hierarchies. Reservation for Bellamy, Nora said, a pause, brief. But Nora had spent years noticing pauses. Of course. Right this way. The dining room opened up around her, and Nora felt it instantly, that particular awareness that arrives when you understand that you are being observed. Not by one person, by several. A table near the window where 3 people sat too casually, too still, like they'd been arranged there. A man with his phone angled at an angle that wasn't quite about the food. A woman with dark hair who glanced at Nora and then looked quickly away. Nora recognized it the same way you recognize a cold draft. From a door, you can't see not by seeing it, but by feeling it against your skin. She sat. Her table was set for 2, near enough to the center of the room to be visible, far enough from the kitchen to be quiet. She ordered water. She looked at the menu without reading it. She watched the door. At 7:22, the room changed. She didn't hear him before she saw him. That surprised her later, because Lucian Vercetti was not a small man, and he was not a quiet one. But what arrived ahead of him wasn't sound. It was attention. The way a room's energy reorganizes around something significant, the same way water reorganizes around a stone dropped into it. Every person at the bar seemed to find a reason to look somewhere else. The waiter near the service station straightened slightly without understanding why. The hostess, who had been perfectly composed 2 minutes ago, pressed her lips together and folded her hands. And then Lucian Vercetti walked through the door. He was 33, though he didn't wear it easily. There were lines around his eyes that came from years of watching everything and trusting very little, and the way he scanned a room when he entered wasn't casual. It was calibrated. Black suit, no tie, a jaw set like he'd decided something before he even crossed the threshold. Tattoos at his wrists where the cuffs ended. Dark hair slightly damp from the rain. He saw her immediately. She was watching the door, so she saw the moment his eyes found her table. Just a second, maybe less, where he went absolutely still. Not recoiling. Not retreating into whatever expression people put on when they're managing their reaction. Just still. Then from somewhere behind her and to the left, that laugh. Rafe's laugh. Full-throated, purposeful, landing like a fist against a wall. And it spread, one of those laughs that gives other people permission, a ripple through the nearest table. Sisses. A murmur. A smirk from someone near the bar. Nora heard it the way you hear something you were already expecting. Like the confirmation of a fear you'd been carrying all evening. She pressed her hands flat against the tablecloth. She did not cry. She had made herself a promise in the cab that she would not cry, and she was keeping it. She watched Lucian Vercetti cross the room toward her. This was the moment she understood this, even in the middle of it, where the equation resolved itself. Where the man who'd been talked into meeting some woman he'd never heard of, at a restaurant full of people who were already laughing, would assess the situation, weigh whatever he'd been told against whatever he was seeing, and make the only logical choice. He would turn around, or he would stop to speak to Rafe first. A word, a look, something that communicated that this had been enough, that the joke had landed, that they could all go home now. Nora kept her eyes on the tablecloth. She could not watch him walk away. She could survive this. She had survived much worse. She knew that, but she could not watch. She heard his footsteps stop, right in front of her table. She looked up. Lucian Vercetti was standing 2 feet away from her, with an expression she couldn't immediately read, not because it was blank, but because it was complicated in a way that didn't fit in any category she'd prepared for. He reached up, unhurriedly, and removed his coat. He held it over one arm. Then he pulled out the chair across from her, the motion so deliberate and calm that for a moment Nora forgot to breathe. He sat down. He looked at her directly, not around her, not past her, but at her, and said, "You waited for me. The least I can do is stay." The laughter died. Not gradually. Not the way sound fades when people lose interest. It died the way a flame dies, when you put your hand over it suddenly, completely, and with an awareness that something had shifted. Nora stared at him. She had been preparing for humiliation since she walked through the door. She had been preparing since she'd gotten in the cab. Truthfully, she'd been preparing since Rafe Calder's first message, because some part of her had always understood that good things didn't arrive for her without complications attached. She had not been preparing for this. She started. "The water looks good," Lucian said, glancing at her glass with the same even tone a person uses when they're trying to give someone else a moment to recover. I've been in the rain for 3 blocks. Is there a server who's going to pretend not to see me for the next 5 minutes? Or are they going to be reasonable? And despite everything, despite the eyes still on them, despite Rafe's table somewhere behind her, despite the dress she'd almost returned and the lip color Maisie had insisted on, and the 45 minutes she'd spent in front of the mirror, telling herself 3 things, Nora Bellamy almost smiled. Almost. The one on the left, she said quietly. He's been hovering near that column for 10 minutes. If you look at him, he'll come over. Lucian turned his head exactly that much. The server materialized immediately. Lucian ordered sparkling water and asked Nora if she'd had time to look at the menu yet. The question directed at her, in a way that made it clear. He was asking because he wanted to know, not because he was filling silence. Not really, Nora admitted. Neither have I. Let's start over. It was such a small thing to say. Let's start over. 2 words that didn't technically mean anything more than opening a menu. But Nora felt them land somewhere between her ribs, and she had to look back down at the table for a moment to get herself together. She was not going to make this into something it wasn't. He was being decent. Some men were decent. That was allowed. It didn't mean anything except that he had manners, and that the people at the table behind her had underestimated something. What? She wasn't yet sure. She opened the menu. She was aware that the dining room had normalized itself, the way water smooths over after a stone's impact, but still carries the memory of the disruption beneath the surface. She was aware that Rafe's table had gone quiet in a way that was different from before. She was aware that somewhere in this restaurant there was at least one phone angled in her direction. She was also aware, for the first time all evening, that she was hungry. The salmon looks good, she said. Get the salmon, Lucian said. No performance, no excess. Just a man who had an opinion about fish. You haven't seen the menu yet. I grew up eating my grandmother's cooking every Sunday of my life until I was 22. A restaurant menu is never going to be more interesting than that. Pick something. It's either right or it's not. What's your grandmother's name? Nora blinked. What? Your grandmother? What was her name? Why, mine was Rosaria. She made this sauce on Sundays that took all day, and by noon the whole building smelled like it. And you could track exactly which neighbors liked us and which ones were just being tolerable based on who came to the door on some excuse around dinner time. He glanced up from the menu. Did Eleanor cook? Mostly she baked, Nora said, and something loosened in her chest without her permission. She had this lemon pound cake that she'd make every Christmas. She'd have 6 of them going at the same time, different stages, and the whole kitchen it was warm, even in winter. What happened to the recipe? Nora paused. I have it. I've made it twice, and it's never been right. It won't be. It's not about the recipe. She looked at him. Some things are about who was making them, he said, and went back to the menu like he hadn't just said something that was going to cost her sleep. She ordered the salmon. He ordered the pasta. The server disappeared. Behind her, at Rafe's table, someone shifted in their seat. For the first 20 minutes, Nora kept waiting for the other shoe. She knew how this worked, or she thought she did. She'd spent 8 years in a marriage with a man named Derek who had known exactly how to make her feel welcomed before he made her feel worthless. Warmth as currency, kindness as leverage. She had learned over a very long time and at some significant cost to watch for the moment when things tilted. She watched. It didn't tilt. Lucian ate his pasta with the unself-conscious appetite of someone who didn't perform at mealtimes. He listened when she talked, actually listened. The kind of listening where you can feel the other person's attention, like a pressure. Like they're tracking every word not for what to say next, but because they actually want to know what comes after. He asked about Maisie, not in the way some men ask about your children, with the tone of someone filing information under obstacles, but with the directness of someone who decided the child was the most interesting person in the story so far and wanted to understand her better. What does she read? He asked. Right now, everything with animals. But she started out with anything she could find about the ocean. Marine life, ocean exploration, shipwrecks. At 6 years old, she could tell you more about bioluminescent creatures than any adult I knew. Smart kid. She's terrifying, Nora said honestly, in the best possible way. There are moments where I'm watching her think through something, and I wonder where she came from. Like she arrived already, knowing things I haven't figured out yet. Kids do that, Lucian said, before the world starts in on them. Nora heard something in that, something behind the words, but she didn't reach for it. What about you? She asked instead. Do you have any? No, quick, clean, no edge, but no opening either. Okay? I was never in a situation to do that right, he said after a second. Some people know that about themselves early. I was late to it. It was not an apology. It was just information, offered plainly, and Nora respected it more than an apology would have been. What is it you write? He asked, redirecting with the ease of someone who'd learned exactly when to move a conversation and when to let it stay still. Nora hesitated. She didn't talk about her writing in most conversations. Not because she was ashamed of it, she was beyond that, mostly on the days when she was being honest with herself, but because it invited a particular kind of response. The polite interest that was actually polite dismissal. The "oh, how nice that" meant that's not a real thing. She'd gotten it from Derek for years, delivered with the precision of someone who understood that the slow diminishment of something you love is more effective than attacking it directly. Children's books, she said, watching. Lucian nodded. What age? Middle grade. 8 to 12 mostly. One series I've been working on for God, 4 years now. It's about a girl who can hear what animals are thinking, but only the animal is telling the truth and everyone around the girl is lying, and she has to figure out. She stopped. It sounds strange. It sounds like a book for kids who've grown up around adults who lie, Lucian said. Nora went very still. That's yes, she said. That's exactly what it is. He held her gaze for a moment, not in a way that demanded anything, more like acknowledgement, like he'd identified something and wanted her to know it had been seen. My grandmother told stories, he said, not books, just stories. At the table, after dinner, she'd make them up on the spot, and they were always about someone who'd been told they were less than they were and who found out eventually that the person doing the telling was just scared. Scared of what? Of how much space the other person took up. In the world, in a room, he paused. The best stories are usually about that. Someone learning they were allowed to take up space. Nora looked at this man with the tattooed hands and the bodyguards downstairs, and the way an entire dining room had reorganized itself when he walked in and thought about what Maisie had said on the edge of the bathroom counter. You look pretty, Mom. You just don't look like you believe it yet. She picked up her fork. She ate. And for the first time in a long time, sitting at a table felt less like an endurance and more like a meal. It was Rafe who finally moved. He'd been still for too long. Nora had been tracking it peripherally. That quiet at the table behind her that had a different texture from the quiet of people enjoying their dinner. It was the quiet of people recalculating, of a plan going somewhere it wasn't supposed to go. She'd registered Lucian's slight change of expression, once or twice the barely perceptible shift of his attention toward whatever was happening at that table, the kind of awareness that didn't announce itself, just adjusted, like a man who'd spent years being alert to rooms. They were talking about her manuscript, she'd admitted. There was a completed draft, which she'd never said aloud to anyone except Denise and Patricia when the sound arrived. A chair scraping, footsteps, and then a voice, loud in the particular way that's designed to reach an audience. Boss, you've stayed longer than any of us expected. The words were cheerful, casual, the tone of a man who believed the ground was still under his feet. Nora felt the table change before she understood why. The warmth that had been building across the table, careful, tentative, the warmth of a thing that might be real, disappeared. Not because it was taken back, because the air around it changed and it had nowhere to grow. She turned her head. He was standing a few tables away, a man she hadn't focused on before, early 40s maybe, well-dressed, with the confidence of someone who'd been adjacent to power, long enough to believe it was his own. He was smiling at Lucian the way you smile when you've told a joke and you're waiting for the room to catch up. His eyes moved to Nora. The smile didn't waver. That was the part that hit her hardest. Not the cruelty of it. She'd been expecting cruelty, in some form, all evening, but the comfort. He was comfortable. Standing in a room full of people, looking at a woman he'd helped set up for humiliation, and he was comfortable. Nora looked back at Lucian. For a fraction of a second, just that. A fraction, she saw something she hadn't expected to see on the face of one of Chicago's most feared men. He looked like he didn't know what was happening. Then, quickly, he did. The shift that moved across Lucian Vercetti's face in the next 3 seconds was not dramatic. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand up. He didn't do any of the things that someone in his position, with his reputation, might have been expected to do. He just went cold. Not angry, not yet. Cold. The way a room goes cold in the moment before storm, when the air pressure drops and everything gets very, very quiet. Sit down, Rafe, he said. 2 words, completely even. No inflection that would give Rafe anything to deflect from. But Rafe was too far in, or too drunk, or too certain that this was still going the way he'd planned. He didn't sit down, just saying. Rafe continued, with the grin of a man who'd convinced himself he was among friends. We didn't think you'd make it past the appetizers. Across the restaurant, something that had been holding its breath let it go. Nora's hands were back on the tablecloth, pressed flat. She was back in the restaurant entryway, standing in the rain-damp coat. She was back in every room she'd ever entered, not knowing whether the welcome was real. She was back in her kitchen at 31 years old, with Derek explaining, calmly, reasonably, as if it were a kindness, why she shouldn't eat the second piece, why she shouldn't buy that dress, why certain rooms weren't meant for people who couldn't understand how to carry themselves. She looked at Lucian. He was looking at her. And the question she could not ask, were you part of this? Did you know? Is this what I think? It is must have been visible on her face? Because something moved in his expression that she hadn't seen before. It wasn't offense. It was something that looked almost like pain. Nora, he said. Just her name. She was already reaching for her bag. She did not cry at the table. She had made a promise in the cab, and she was keeping it. The dining room watched her stand up. She kept her shoulders straight. She had made herself a promise about that, too. It was Maria who stopped her before she reached the door. Not physically a hand on a shoulder, a blocking of her path. Just a voice, low and tight, and stripped of the comfortable cruelty that Rafe's voice had carried. Wait. Nora stopped, because the voice sounded the way guilt sounds, when it's run out of room to hide. The woman was younger than Nora had expected, somewhere in her late 20s, dark-haired, and at that moment, looking like someone who had arrived at a place she hadn't planned to reach when the evening started. I need you to know, Maria said, and her voice cracked on the second word and held on the rest of it, that we picked you, deliberately, because Rafe thought she stopped, because we thought Lucian would take one look at me and leave, Nora said. Maria closed her eyes. A single second, then opened them. Yes, and someone has been recording this. A longer pause. Yes. Nora absorbed that. The dining room was performing normalcies around them. Silverware, conversation, the careful noise of people pretending they weren't watching. But every person within 20 feet had gone very still. How long? Nora asked. Since you sat down. She thought about the last 2 hours. The grandmother's recipes, Maisie on the bathroom counter. The salmon. The conversation about children who grew up around adults who lie. All of it. She thought about who was watching it right now on the other end of that camera. She looked at Maria. Did he know? She asked. Maria shook her head. Nora believed her. She wasn't entirely sure why she believed her. She'd been wrong about people before, profoundly and expensively wrong, but she believed her. Thank you for telling me, Nora said. She walked out. The rain was still there. Of course it was. Chicago didn't stop raining because you'd had a difficult evening. She stepped under the overhang and stood there for a moment, and she let herself feel what she was feeling without immediately trying to manage it. That was something she'd learned to do in the last 4 years, and it was still not easy, but she did it. She felt humiliated. She felt angry. She felt underneath those, something smaller and older, a familiar resignation. Of course. The voice was quiet, but she recognized it. Of course it was too good. Of course it was a setup. Of course. She closed her eyes. Behind her, the restaurant door opened. She heard his footsteps on the wet pavement before she turned around. She knew it was him not from the sound of the footsteps, but from the fact that the sound behind her changed quality, the same way the dining room had changed quality when he walked in. Something about the attention the world paid to Lucian Vercetti preceded him everywhere he went. She turned around anyway. He was standing 3 feet away, his coat back on now, rain already finding the shoulders of it. He looked at her, the same way he'd looked at her, across the table, for the past 2 hours, like she was the point. I didn't know, he said. I know, she said. He seemed to take that in. Why? She thought about it. The honest answer. Because when she told me, I watched your face. Something shifted in his expression. He looked away from her, out toward the street, and Nora watched him work through something what? She couldn't tell. But it was real. She was fairly good at telling the difference by now. I'm going to ask you something, she said. He looked back. When you walked in tonight and you saw me sitting there. She stopped. Started again. What did you think? He didn't look away. He didn't shift or reframe or redirect. the way men sometimes did when a question arrived that they didn't want to answer, honestly. I thought, he said, that you looked terrified. She hadn't expected that. She'd been prepared for something diplomatic, something that acknowledged her, without really seeing her. She hadn't been prepared for the truth, delivered plainly, as if it were the only thing worth saying. Not anything else? She asked. I wondered who'd scared you that badly, he said. I wondered what kind of person could walk into a room looking like they expected the worst of it and still show up anyway. Nora looked at the rain. She thought about the lemon pound cake, about Maisie swinging her feet on the counter, about a manuscript 4 years old that she'd never let anyone read, about a woman who'd spent 8 years having herself slowly erased by someone who'd convinced her the erasing was for her own good. The thing that broke inside her was quiet. Small, nobody would have known it from the outsides except that her exhale was longer than it should have been. She pressed her lips together. She didn't let it get further than that. Not tonight. She would get in a cab, and she would go home to Maisie, and she would sit in the kitchen and probably cry into a cup of tea, and then she would figure out, tomorrow, in the daylight, what she was supposed to do with any of this. That was the plan. She looked back at Lucian Vercetti standing in the rain outside Crown Meridian on the worst possible Friday night, and she memorized the way he looked right at that moment, not because she expected to see him again, but because she wanted to remember what it felt like when a man looked at her like she was the point. Then she raised her hand for a cab. The cab pulled away from the curb, and Nora didn't look back. That was the decision she made in the 3 seconds between raising her hand and the car door closing behind her. She would not look back. She would not watch the restaurant disappear. She would not give herself the opportunity to see whether Lucian Vercetti was still standing in the rain or whether he'd already gone back inside. Back to the warmth. Back to whatever his Friday nights actually looked like before some of his people decided she would make a useful prop for an evening's entertainment. She looked straight ahead. The driver had the radio on low something with a saxophone, old and slow, and the city moved past the windows in wet amber streaks. Streetlights, doing that thing they do in rain, where they blur at the edges and look like they're trying to be something more beautiful than they are. Nora's hands were in her lap, still. She was making them stay still. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Denise. She let it ring. She would call Denise tomorrow, or maybe the day after, when she had organized the evening into something she could describe without her voice doing things she didn't want it to do. The phone stopped, then started again. Not Denise this time. A number she didn't recognize. She stared at it for 2 rings, then declined. Called back immediately. She declined again. A text arrived. Unknown number. 3 words, don't go home. She turned her phone face down on her knee. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. You okay back there? Fine, she said. Thank you. She was not fine, but she was upright, which was close enough for a Friday night in November. Patricia was still on the couch when Nora came through the door, but the popcorn was gone, and the television was on something with a lot of dramatic music. And Patricia had the look of a woman who had been trying not to fall asleep for the last 40 minutes and was mostly losing. Maisie was not on the couch. She went down about 9, Patricia said, sitting up and blinking. Read for a while first. Wouldn't tell me what she was reading, but she had that look. She paused. Looked at Nora the way women who have lived a long time look at you when they can tell something happened. How was it? Fine, Nora said. Nora, I'm tired, Patricia. Thank you for staying. Patricia stood slowly, with the care of someone whose knees had opinions, and picked up her sweater from the arm of the couch. She didn't push. That was one of the things about Patricia she had lived through. Enough of her own terrible evenings to know when a woman needed the question asked and when she needed it left alone. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. Okay, there's tea in the pot. I made it an hour ago, so it's strong now. Okay. Patricia got her coat, got to the door, stopped, turned around. For what it's worth, she said, you look like you held yourself together. That counts. Nora nodded. Patricia left. Nora stood in the middle of her own living room for a long moment, in her dark green dress and her pink lip color and her good shoes, and she let the apartment be quiet around her. Maisie's backpack was on the floor by the couch. A library book was spread face down on the coffee table. Maisie never used bookmarks, always left them open like that, and Nora had been meaning to explain about spines for approximately 3 years. A drawing Maisie had done was taped to the kitchen door frame, slightly crooked. A girl and an animal that might have been a dolphin, or possibly a large dog, the girl's arms open wide. Nora reached up and straightened the drawing. Then she went into the kitchen and poured the tea and sat down at the table and cried. She was quiet about it. She'd learned a long time ago how to cry in a way that didn't wake a sleeping child, which was maybe the most specifically awful skill she'd acquired in the last 9 years. But there it was, and she didn't try to stop it, or reframe it, or tell herself she shouldn't feel this way. She let it run its course, which took about 6 minutes, and then she washed her face at the kitchen sink and dried it on the dish towel and sat back down. Picked up her phone. 11 missed calls, 7 texts. 3 from Denise, which climbed rapidly from how'd it go, to hello, to I'm looking this place up on Instagram right now. 2 from the unknown number. 1 from a number she didn't recognize at all, with a Chicago area code. That said, simply, the recording is already online. I'm sorry, Mr. Maria. Nora sat with that. Then she opened her browser. It had 40,000 views. That was the number when she found it. At 11:47 on a Friday night, posted to a platform she barely used by an account she'd never heard of. And in the time it took her to watch the first 30 seconds of it herself, walking into Crown Meridian, the table, the way she'd pressed her hands flat before Lucian arrived. The number changed to 41,000. She watched it. All of it. It was worse and better than she'd expected, which was its own specific torture. Worse because she could see, from the camera angle, things she hadn't been able to see from where she was sitting. The moment Rafe leaned over to Silas and said something, behind his hand, both of them, watching her with the ease of men who had never once in their lives had to wonder whether a room was laughing at them. She could see the server near the kitchen who'd looked up when Rafe laughed, and the way a couple near the window had glanced at her table with the expression people get when they're watching something they know is unkind, but find compelling anyway. She could see herself, hands flat on the tablecloth, back straight. The very deliberate way she held her face steady while the room reorganized itself around the fact of her. Then she could see Lucian walking in, and she could see his face when he found her table that half second of stillness, and she could see it more clearly from the camera's angle than she'd been able to see it from across the table. And what she saw was not what she'd expected to see on the face of a man being pranked into a date with a woman his associates considered a joke. He looked like he'd made a decision. Not surprise, not calculation, a decision. The kind that comes before the thinking, from wherever in a person the thinking comes after. She watched him cross the room and pull out the Sue chair. She heard what he said. She saw herself look up at him. She watched 41,000 strangers, watched the most humiliating evening of her recent life, and somewhere around the part where she talked about Eleanor's lemon pound cake, Nora stopped watching because she needed to close the laptop and put her head down on the kitchen table for a minute, and she did. When she came back up, the number was at 63,000. Across the city, in the back room of a building on West Erie that didn't have a sign outside and didn't need one, Lucian Vercetti sat at a table and didn't say anything for a long time. Rafe was standing near the door. He'd chosen that position carefully close enough to the exit to suggest he hadn't done anything worth keeping him from it. Far enough from Lucian to suggest that some part of his body understood the situation more clearly than his mouth did. Silas was seated. Maria was seated. They'd been seated since Lucian walked in 20 minutes ago and said, flatly, sit down, and nobody had tested what the alternative looked like. The room had the particular quality of air that exists in spaces where things have gone wrong in the past. Lucian's organization had been using this building for 11 years. A lot of difficult conversations had happened here. The walls had an awareness of it. Walk me through it, Lucian said. His voice was level. That was the thing about Lucian Vercetti that the people who'd been with him longest knew. The quieter his voice got, the further you were from anything good. Rafe shifted. It was supposed to be funny. Walk me through it. We thought you've been wound up, man. You've been working 18-hour days for 3 months. We thought a night out. Something to make you laugh. You thought I would sit down across from a woman, look at her, and walk away. Lucian said it without accusation. Flatter than that. Like a man reading back a transcript. That's what you thought was funny. Silas looked at the table. Maria had been looking at the table since they sat down. Rafe was the only one still trying. It was meant to be a 10-minute thing. Have a drink. You'd come over to our table. We'd all go somewhere else. You had a camera on her. Rafe's idea, Silas said immediately. Rafe turned. Don't. It was Rafe's idea. Silas said again, to Lucian, with the particular cowardice of a man deciding, in real time, that distance from the decision was more valuable than loyalty to the person who made it. Lucian looked at Silas for a moment. Something in his expression said he'd filed that away. Then he looked back at Rafe. You picked her specifically, Lucian said. You went looking for someone you thought I'd reject. That's not a prank. That's a production.
Lucian?
You chose a woman. You brought her into a room full of people, and you filmed her for your own entertainment. The levelness in his voice hadn't changed at all, and it was somehow more unsettling than if it had. And you thought I'd think that was funny. Rafe swallowed. We didn't think it would go this far. How far did you think it would go? No answer. Rafe, a half-second pause. How far did you think it would go? Thought you'd laugh, said quietly, finally, like an admission pulled out by force. I thought you'd come over to the table, and the whole thing would be we'd all laugh about it. Including her? The question sat in the room. Rafe's jaw tightened. I didn't think about no, Lucian said. You didn't. He stood up, not quickly. Lucian rarely did anything quickly in a room. It was one of the things that made him effective in these situations, and deeply uncomfortable to be across from. He moved like a man who had never once in his adult life needed to rush to make a point. The camera, he said. Who has it? Rafe reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, set it on the table. That's not the only copy, Lucian said. Pause. Mireia, Lucian said. She looked up, first time in 20 minutes. Tell me. It went to a shared drive, she said. Her voice was careful. Not frightened, Mireia had never been frightened of Lucian, the way some people were frightened of Lucian, but careful. Rafe set up an automatic upload. I didn't know until she stopped. Until Rafe posted it. The room went very still. Lucian turned to look at Rafe. Rafe had the expression of a man who has just realized the ground he was so certain of has been mud the whole time. You posted it, Lucian said. I'd had a few drinks. You posted it. I've taken it down. It's been up long enough. Lucian picked up Rafe's phone from the table. He looked at it for a moment without touching the screen. Then he set it back down and stepped away from the table. Get out. Rafe blinked. What, both of you? He didn't look at Silas. Silas was on his feet before Lucian finished the sentence. Rafe was slower, the kind of slow that wanted to believe there was still something to negotiate. Lucian, Rafe, the name landed like a period at the end of a sentence that wasn't going anywhere else. I'll call you tomorrow with the specifics. Right now, you need to leave before I make a decision in this room that I can't walk back in the morning. Rafe left. The door closed. Lucian stood with his back to it for a long moment. Mireia was still in her chair. She hadn't moved during the dismissal, which either meant she understood she wasn't included in it, or she was too tired to stand. How bad, he said. I checked before we came here, she said. 40,000 when we walked in. It's climbing. Her name. It's in the comment section. Someone tagged her writing group's Instagram. Her daughter? Not yet. But if her name is out there, find out what you can and keep it contained. He turned, looked at Mireia directly. How did you pick her? Mireia pressed her lips together. Rafe had criteria. I know what Rafe had. I'm asking how you found her specifically. Beat. She came up through a search. Rafe wanted someone who his word was unlikely. He had a list of things. Weight, single parent, no money, no connections, no one who would make noise about it afterward. She paused. I found her name in a community newsletter. She runs a writing group. She'd published a short piece about her daughter for a local paper. She seemed real, Lucian said. Mireia looked at him. Yes, which is why it was never going to be as simple as Rafe thought. Mireia didn't say anything. You went along with it, Lucian said. Not an accusation. A fact being stated with the expectation that she would sit with it. She sat with it. I thought it would end before it started, she said. I thought you'd walk in, see what was happening, and shut it down before she had to sit there more than 5 minutes. Her jaw tightened. I miscalculated who you'd decide was more important. Lucian looked at her. What does that mean? It means I thought you'd shut it down for your own pride. She met his eyes. Not because of her. Something moved across his face. Not anger. Closer to recognition. She's going to wake up tomorrow and her name is going to be attached to the worst evening of her recent life, Mireia said. And she hasn't done anything. No, Lucian said. She hasn't. He walked to the window. The street outside was still wet, the rain having finally slowed to the kind of drizzle that doesn't soak you, but doesn't quit either. He stood there with his hands in his coat pockets and thought about a woman pressing her hands flat against a white tablecloth. There's something else, Mireia said. He didn't turn around. In the comment section. There are people who already know who you are. A pause. and people who are doing the math on why a woman like her was brought to a restaurant like that to meet someone like you. And if the story that emerges from this is the one Rafe intended, that it was funny, that she was the joke that follows her. Her name, her work, her daughter. Another pause, heavier this time. But if the story that emerges is the one that's actually on camera. Lucian turned around. Then it follows you, he said. Maria nodded, and not in the way you usually want things to follow you. He looked at her for a long moment. She held the look without flinching, which was one of the reasons she'd lasted longer in his orbit than most people. Make sure she gets home safe, he said, without anyone knowing it came from us. I already sent someone. He nodded, and Lucian, she stood. For what it's worth, what you did in there tonight. Staying. The way you talked to her. She picked up her coat. Rafe thought that was the part that went wrong. What do you think? She looked at him. I think it's the only part that was right. She left. Lucian stood alone in the room and listened to the building settle around him and didn't move for a long time. By 2 in the morning, the video had 300,000 views. By 4, it had broken 1 million. Nora found out at 6:15 when came padding into her room and stood beside the bed and said, Mom, there's something on your phone. And Nora took the phone from her daughter's hands, still half asleep, and looked at the screen and saw her own face looking back at her from 17 different notifications. She sat up. Maisie climbed onto the bed beside her, cross-legged, watching her buzzer's face with the focus of a child who has learned that adult expressions contain important information. Is that you? Maisie asked, looking at the phone. Yes. Where is that? A restaurant. Who's that man? Someone I said dinner with. Maisie considered this. He looked serious, but not mean serious. Nora looked at her daughter. What's the difference? Maisie thought about it with the gravity she brought to most things. Mean serious is when people look serious, and they're hoping you'll be scared. He looks serious like she tilted her head, like he's paying attention. Nora put the phone face down on the nightstand. She had 212 unread messages, 17 missed calls, most of them from numbers she didn't recognize, 4 voicemails, 3 emails in her writing account, the one she used for the children's group, and her manuscript correspondence from people she'd never heard of, subject lines she couldn't read yet. She had a daughter sitting cross-legged on her bed, waiting for information. I went on a date, Nora said. Someone filmed it and put it online without asking me. Maisie absorbed this. Did you know they were filming? No. Is that allowed? No. Maisie's expression went to a place that 9-year-olds' expressions go when they encounter something that violates their understanding of how basic fairness is supposed to operate, a furious, clear-eyed assessment that adults complicate with nuance and circumstance, and she hadn't yet. That's not okay, Maisie said. No, Nora said. It's not. Are you okay? Nora looked at her daughter. The question, asked by Maisie with her hair still flattened from sleep and her serious eyes, was the most straightforward version of the thing she'd been trying to answer since 11:47 the previous night. I'm going to be, she said, which was different from okay. Maisie knew the difference. She nodded, accepting this, and then uncurled herself from the bed and said she was going to make toast. And did Nora want some? And Nora said yes, and listened to her daughter move through the apartment with the particular soft efficiency of a child being careful, because she understood that care was required. Nora picked up her phone. She opened the email from a name she didn't recognize, with a subject line that said simply, "You're writing." She read 3 sentences and stopped. Then she read it again. Then she sat there for a while with the phone in her hand and the sound of toast in the kitchen and the city coming awake outside her window, and thought about the fact that some things move in directions you haven't prepared for, and you can either stand in the middle of the intersection trying to figure out which way you were supposed to be facing, or you can notice where your feet are already pointed. Her phone buzzed. The unknown number again. She answered it this time. Ms. Bellamy, a woman's voice, brisk, not unkind. My name is Maria Holt. I don't expect you to want to talk to me. I want you to know that the video is being taken down from every platform we can reach, and a legal notice is going out this morning regarding the original posting. You'll receive a formal communication today from an attorney. A pause. Not a strategic one, an actual pause. The kind where someone is choosing between the professional thing to say and the human thing to say. I also want you to know that what happened last night was not something Lucian authorized or was aware of, and that the people responsible for arranging it no longer work for him. Nora said nothing. That's all I called to tell you, Maria said. You don't owe us any response. I just thought you deserved to know. How many views? Nora asked. A beat. As of 20 minutes ago, just under 2 million. Nora closed her eyes. Ms. Bellamy, 2 million people watched someone film me without my consent, and it's just on the internet. We're working on it. You can't take down 2 million views, Nora said. Not angry, just stating it. The way you state something when you've arrived at a fact you didn't want, and you're making yourself look at it directly. Once 2 million people have seen something, it's already real. It already happened. Silence. You're right, Maria said. And she said it without the cushion of a follow-up, which was the most honest version of the acknowledgement Nora had heard from anyone since the previous night. Nora heard Maisie put a plate on the table. Miss Holt, Nora said. Yes, the man at the restaurant, the one who laughed first, loud enough for the room to hear. What happens to him? Another pause. He's been removed from the organization, Maria said carefully. All three of them have. That's not what I asked. The pause was longer this time. He loses everything that came with working for Lucian, Maria said finally. The money, the access, the protection, the status he's been trading on for 6 years, a measured breath. For someone like Rafe, that's not nothing. That's most of what he is. Nora thought about standing in the entryway of Crown Meridian with rain on her coat. About Rafe's laugh, full-throated and comfortable and designed to carry. About the way it had felt to hear it and know, without a word being spoken, exactly what it meant. Good, she said. She hung up. She went to the kitchen. Maisie had made 2 pieces of toast and poured 2 glasses of juice, and was sitting with her library book open on the table, pretending to read in the way she did when she was actually monitoring the room. Nora sat down. She picked up her toast. She thought about the email, about the 3 sentences from the name she didn't recognize, and the subject line that said you're writing. Maisie, she said. Maisie looked up. If someone found your writing, something you'd been working on for a long time, and wanted to know more about it, would you tell them about it, even if you were scared? Maisie considered this with appropriate seriousness. Scared of what? That it wasn't good enough. That it was that you'd worked on it so long it had become part of you, and you didn't know what it meant if someone else looked at it and decided it wasn't what you thought it was. Maisie thought for a moment. I think, she said slowly, that the scary part isn't if they don't like it. The scary part is if they do, because then you have to believe them. Nora looked at her daughter across the breakfast table. 9 years old. Where did she come from? Yeah, Nora said. I think that's right. Maisie nodded and went back to her book with the finality of someone who has dispensed useful advice and is now returning to their own concerns. Nora picked up her phone. She opened the email again. She read past the 3 sentences this time. She read all the way to the bottom. Then she set the phone down, and she sat with it, and she breathed, and she did not look away from what she was feeling, not the fear of it, not the enormity of it, not the specific terror of something you've wanted for years, arriving from a direction you never expected, and at a cost you never agreed to pay. She sat with all of it. Then she picked up her phone again, and she started to type. At 9:47 that same morning, Lucian Vercetti was in an office on the 14th floor of a building on Michigan Avenue when his phone rang. Not the personal one, the other one. He looked at the screen, set it down without answering. It rang again. He let it. The 3rd time he picked up. You've seen it, said the voice on the other end. A man named Victor Ashford, 61 years old, based in New York, with fingers in more arrangements across the Midwest than most people would have guessed from looking at him, across a dinner table. He and Lucian had an understanding that was 11 years old and had survived several tests. This was a different kind of call from Victor. Lucian could tell from the first 2 words. I've seen it, Lucian said. 2.3 million views, Victor said. As of this morning. I know. There are names being attached to you in some of the coverage. Speculation. A pause. The kind of coverage that draws eyes to things we'd rather not have eyes on. I know that too. The people who arranged it. Gone, Lucian said. Silence on the other end. Rafe's been with you 6 years, Victor said. Yes, that's a long time. He filmed a woman without her consent because he thought humiliating her was entertainment. Lucian's voice stayed level. Another silence. Different quality. The woman, Victor said, careful now. What's your relationship with her? We had dinner. That's it? That's it. The internet doesn't think that's it. The internet can think whatever it wants. Victor made a sound not quite a laugh, something shorter and more calculated than that. Lucian. You understand that if this becomes a story about you, about who you are, who you've been connected with, that's not a story you can manage from inside it. I know. So what are you planning to do? Lucian looked out the window. 14 floors up, Michigan Avenue was doing what Michigan Avenue always did, on a Saturday morning moving, indifferent, enormous. The city going about its own business, without any awareness of the specific weight being carried in one office on one floor of one building. The right thing, he said. Victor was quiet for a moment. That's not a plan, he said finally. It's the beginning of one, Lucian said, and hung up. He sat in his chair and looked at his desks, and thought about what the right thing actually was. Specifically, in a situation where the wrong things had already been set in motion by people who worked for him, using his name and his proximity to arrange an evening designed to degrade a woman who had never done a thing to deserve it. Thought about Nora pressing her hands flat on the tablecloth. He thought about what she'd asked him, standing in the rain. When you first saw me, what did you think? He'd told her the truth. He always told the truth in those specific moments, the ones where a lie would be easier and more comfortable, and where the person asking would probably accept it because they'd already decided they knew what the answer was. He'd told her the truth, and she'd stood there in the rain and absorbed it, and something in her face had shifted, not dramatically, not like in a movie, but like something internal that had been held at a particular tension for a very long time, had just slightly released. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. His door opened. Mireia. She had a laptop and the expression of someone arriving with information was going to complicate the next several hours. Tell me, he said. She set the laptop on his desk. He looked at the screen. The video was everywhere. They'd taken it down from the original posting, but it was already replicated across a dozen platforms, commented on, shared, dissected, and 3 separate news outlets had run pieces on it overnight. The comment sections were enormous and contentious, and not entirely what Rafe had intended when he'd pointed his phone across a restaurant, because the comments weren't what he'd expected. They weren't laughing at Nora. They were watching Lucian pull out a chair, and they were watching a room of people who'd been laughing go silent, and something about that specific image, the feared man, the targeted woman. The silence had hit a nerve in 2.3 million people that none of the people who'd arranged the evening had accounted for. They're asking about her writing, Mireia said. Lucian looked up. Comments. People are asking where they can find her books. Someone found her writing group's page and posted it. Someone else found the piece she wrote about Maisie in the local paper and shared it. She paused. She hasn't published any books yet. I know, Lucian said. But people are looking for them. He sat back. There are 3 literary agents who've reached out to the writing group's contact email. In the last 4 hours, Mireia continued. And she stopped. And she turned the laptop to face him more directly. Children's publisher in New York. They sent an email at 7 this morning to the contact address from her writing group page. She met his eyes. They're asking for her manuscripts. Lucian looked at the screen. He thought about a woman at a restaurant table, telling him about a girl who could hear what animals were thinking. And everyone around the girl was lying, and she had to figure out the difference. He thought about how Nora had stopped mid-description and said it sounds strange. Thought about what he'd said back. It sounds like a book for kids who've grown up around adults who lie. He looked at the publisher's email on the screen. He looked at Mireia. Does she know? He asked. I don't know what she's seen yet, Mireia said. I called her this morning. A pause, she answered. Something moved across his face that Mireia, who had known Lucian Vercetti for 4 years and considered herself a reasonable interpreter of his expressions, had not seen before. How did she sound? He said. Mireia thought about it honestly. Like someone standing at the edge of something, she said, trying to figure out whether to jump. Lucian nodded. He looked at the laptop screen for another long moment. Then he looked at the name he'd had in his contacts since 11 o'clock the previous night, a number he hadn't called, hadn't been certain he had the right to call, and had been arguing with himself about since the cab left Crown Meridian and took Nora Bellamy back to her apartment and her daughter and her life that had nothing to do with his. Mireia, he said. Yeah, the 3 people you removed last night. Yes, make sure the specifics of why are documented. Not for us, for her. If anyone ever tries to tell this story in a way that makes her look like the accident rather than the point, I want there to be a record. Mireia looked at him for a moment. Okay, she said. And find out who that publisher is, he said. Not to interfere. I just want to know if they're real. She nodded. She picked up the laptop. The door she stopped Lucian, she said. He looked up. Rafe isn't done, she said. I know you told him to go, and I know he went, but Rafe has been with us long enough to know things, and he's angry enough right now to be stupid about what he does with them. Her eyes were steady. He's not going to stay quiet. Lucian held her gaze. I know, he said. So what do you want to do about it? He was quiet for a moment. Nothing yet, he said. Let him decide what kind of man he wants to be. Maria looked at him for another second. And if he decides wrong, she said. Lucian picked up his phone. Then we'll have a much larger conversation, he said, than the one we had last night. Maria left. Lucian sat alone in his office, with his phone in his hand and Michigan Avenue moving 14 floors below him and 2.3 million strangers somewhere out there who had watched a moment that was never supposed to be witnessed, and decided, without being asked, that it mattered. He opened his contacts. He found the number he'd put in at 11 o'clock the night before. He didn't call it, but he didn't close the screen either. He sat there with it open and thought about a woman who had spent the last decade being made to feel like she was too much and not enough at the same time, and who had still walked through a door in the rain on a Friday night because some part of her had not yet given up on the idea that something good could arrive. He thought about her daughter, asking whether he looked mean, serious, or paying attention serious. He thought about Rafe, somewhere across this city, angry and calculating, and in possession of 6 years of information that hadn't mattered until last night. He thought about Victor's voice on the phone. That's not a plan. It's the beginning of one. He was still sitting there when his phone rang again. Not Maria, not Victor, not any number he recognized. And when he looked at the screen, it was a Chicago area code he didn't know, and something in his chest that didn't have a name and that he wouldn't have admitted to out loud told him before he answered who it was. He picked up. Miss Bellamy, he said. A pause on the other end. How did you know it was me, she said. I didn't, he said. I hoped. Another pause. Longer, the kind that has weight in it. I'm not calling because I forgive you, she said. I'm calling because... She started again. I received an email this morning from a publisher, and I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, and I need you to understand that if you lie to me, I will know, because I spent 8 years learning to tell the difference. Ask, he said, did you arrange it? Her voice was controlled. Careful. The email. The publisher. Did know, he said. Silence. Nora, he said. It was the first time he'd used her first name directly to her face or to her voice, without the cushion of a dinner table between them. What happened to you last night was arranged by people who work for me. What's happening to your name right now? The attention that's not me. That's 2 million strangers who watched you sit in a restaurant and hold yourself together. And they decided that mattered. He paused. The publisher found you the same way they found you. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that he wasn't certain she was still there. Then, I don't know what to do with any of this. I know, he said. I had plans, she said. I've been working on this manuscript for 4 years. I had a plan for how this was supposed to go. Slowly. On my terms. When I was ready. Not because her voice shifted slightly. Not because someone filmed me without my permission and put it on the internet, and now everyone wants to know who I am. I know, he said again. Stop saying that. What do you want me to say? Pause. I want you to tell me something true, she said. That has nothing to do with last night. I want you to tell me one thing that's just true. He thought about it. Your book sounds like exactly what it is, he said. A book for kids who grew up in houses where the adults were lying, and they needed something to tell them they weren't crazy for knowing it. He paused. That's not a niche. That's most people's childhoods. The silence was different this time. That's not nothing, she said quietly. No, he said. It's not, she breathed. I have to go, she said. Maisie, she stopped. My daughter. She has a thing this morning. I don't know what I'm doing here with any of this. Neither do I, he said. That's true also. Another pause. I'll think about it, she said. Okay. She hung up. Lucian set his phone down on his desk. He sat there. Outside, Michigan Avenue moved. Inside, 11 years of a certain kind of life sat around him in the room, in the walls, in the decisions that had accumulated into the shape of who he'd become. And, for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, the shape felt like something he was wearing, rather than something he was. His desk phone rang. The office line. He never answered the office line personally. He looked at it. It rang 3 times, and on the 4th ring, instead of going to the assistant who handled calls he didn't want to take, he picked it up himself, because some part of him had understood before the sound even finished that this particular call was one of the ones that changed the shape of what came next. Mr. Vercetti said, a voice he didn't recognize, flat and deliberate and precise. My name is Daniel Reese. I'm a journalist with the Tribune. I'd like to speak with you about the events of last night, and specifically about a recording that was taken inside Crown Meridian restaurant involving a woman named Nora Bellamy. A pause. I've already spoken with a man named Rafe Calder. Lucian's hand went still on the phone. He had quite a bit to say, Reese continued. Lucian didn't say anything for 4 seconds. He counted them. Not deliberately, his mind did it automatically, the way it had learned to do in rooms where the wrong response came too fast. 4 seconds, while Daniel Reese's voice sat in the air between them, and the office held its particular quality of waiting. Vercetti? Reese said. I heard you, Lucian said. I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond before we run anything. That's why I'm calling now rather than, where did you speak with Rafe Calder? Pause on the journalist's end, brief, professional. I'm not going to share that. When? Earlier this morning. Mr. Vercetti, I want to be straightforward with you. What we have is a recording that's now been seen by approximately 3 million people, a woman whose name and privacy were violated without her consent, and a source who was present at the restaurant and who has given us a significant amount of context about the nature of your organization and the people in it. Reese's voice was not hostile. That was the part that was most dangerous about it. It was the voice of someone who believed they were doing something legitimate and had enough material to justify the belief. I think you'd want to be part of this story rather than absent from it. Lucian looked at his desk. What did Rafe tell you? He said. I think you know what Rafe Calder knows, Reese said. He worked for you for 6 years. That's not an answer. No, Reese said. It's not, but it's what I have to offer right now. A pause. Will you speak with me? Lucian looked at the window. Michigan Avenue, 14 floors down. The city moving through itself the way it always did, without reference to any particular crisis happening at any particular altitude. Not today, he said. Mr. Vercetti, I'll have someone contact you, Lucian said. Before end of business Monday, he hung up. He sat with his hand on the phone for a moment after. Then he stood, and he crossed to the window, and he stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking at nothing specific, and he ran through what Rafe Calder knew. He did this methodically, the way you check a building for exit, not because you're planning to run, but because you need to know what's there. Rafe knew the names of 3 operations that were currently running under legitimate business structures. He knew the arrangement with a port logistics company in Gary. He knew 2 names in the city's municipal infrastructure that Lucian had spent 4 years cultivating carefully and quietly, and which were, if you were being honest about it, the most legally complicated things on the entire list. He knew the location of this office, though that wasn't secret. He knew the location of the building on West Erie, which was less public. He knew enough. Rafe was not, Lucian understood, a man who would go to a journalist out of principle. He was a man who'd gone to a journalist out of wounded pride and the specific anger of someone who believed his position was secure and discovered in the space of one evening that it wasn't. That kind of anger was not strategic. It was reactive. It moved fast, and it moved without full consideration of consequences because the person feeling it had not yet gotten past the initial shock of being expelled from something they'd considered permanent, which meant Rafe had probably told Reese things he would, in 2 weeks, wish he hadn't, which meant the article, whatever it was going to be built on information delivered in a particular emotional state by a particular kind of man, and it was going to read that way, which did not mean it wouldn't do damage. Lucian picked up his phone and called Maria. She answered on the first ring. Rafe talked to a journalist, he said. Silence. Then when? This morning. Tribune. He heard her breath change. How much? I don't know yet. Enough that they called me. He paused. Get Thomas on the phone. I need someone who can assess exposure before Monday. Okay, a beat. Lucian. Yeah, if Rafe gave them the Gary arrangement. I know. That's not just us. There are people in that arrangement who... I know, Maria. A pause. I'll call Thomas, she said. She hung up. Lucian stood at the window for another 30 seconds. Then he picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, and he left the office, and he did not take the elevator because the elevator required standing still, and he needed to move, so he took the stairs, all 14 flights, and by the time he hit the lobby, his jaw ached from the thing he'd been doing with it without noticing. Nora found out about the Tribune article the same way she found out about the video. Her phone. It was Denise this time, not a stranger Denise, who had been trying to reach her since the previous night, and who finally, at 11:30 Saturday morning, sent a text that said, I'm outside your door right now, and if you don't let me in, I'm going to start singing, and you know I can't sing. Nora let her in. Denise came through the door with 2 coffees from the place on the corner and the expression of a woman who had been sitting with information she didn't know how to deliver and had decided that being present was more important than being prepared. Sit down, she said to Nora. I'm already sitting. Sit down more. Maisie was in her room. Nora had heard her moving around in there for the last hour, the sounds of drawers, the particular creak of the desk chair, the low murmur that meant she was either reading out loud to herself or talking to the stuffed dolphin that still occupied the corner of her bookshelf despite being 9 and claiming she was too old for it. Sat at the kitchen table, Denise put a coffee in front of her and sat across from her and pulled out her phone and turned it to face Nora. It was a Tribune web article, posted 40 minutes ago. The headline read, "Behind the viral blind date video, who is Lucian Vercetti, and what does the restaurant scene really tell us?" Nora read the first 3 paragraphs. Then she looked up. "Keep reading," Denise said. "I don't want to keep reading." "I know. Keep reading," she read. The article was careful in the way that serious journalism is careful. It didn't make claims it couldn't support. It used language like alleged and sources suggest, and according to a person with direct knowledge of the organization. It was built from an interview with an unnamed source who had been, the article noted, a senior member of Vercetti's organization until this week. Rafe. The article described Lucian's organization in terms that were accurate enough to be damaging. Described the blind date as having been arranged by members of his inner circle, which was true. It described the video as having been posted intentionally, which was true. Described the woman in the video, Nora, named directly, with the local paper piece about Maisie, linked at the bottom, as having been selected as a target for humiliation, which was true. And then it described, with the particular precision of someone who'd been given specific information and knew how to use it, 3 things about Lucian Vercetti's business arrangements that Nora did not understand in detail, but understood were not meant to be public. But those 3 paragraphs were not the ones that made her set the phone down. The paragraph that made her set the phone down was the last one. Sources indicate that following the incident, Vercetti made immediate contact with the woman in the video. The nature of this contact is unclear, but persons familiar with Vercetti's methods describe it as consistent with a pattern of controlling the narrative around damaging information. "He doesn't leave loose ends," one source said. "If she's involved with him now, that's not an accident." Nora set the phone down on the table. She looked at it. Denise was watching her with the expression of a woman who had come over specifically to be present for whatever happened next. "Denise," Nora said. "Yeah, what does that last paragraph mean?" Denise pressed her lips together. "It means that someone is suggesting, not proving, suggesting that Lucian reaching out to you after last night wasn't because she stopped. It means someone is suggesting it was strategic." Nora looked at the table. She thought about the phone call this morning. She thought about what he'd said about her book. That's not a niche. That's most people's childhoods. She thought about standing in the rain and asking him what he'd thought when he first saw her, and the way he'd answered without hesitation and without softening, because the truth had been more useful than comfort. She thought about the email from the publisher. "Did you arrange it?" "The email." "Publisher." "No." She picked up her phone and looked at the article again. "Read the last paragraph again. He doesn't leave loose ends." She set the phone down. "Is it true?" Denise asked. "Is what true? Did he contact you after?" "Yes." Denise's expression didn't change. Who reached out first? Nora thought about the unknown number at 11:47. Texts don't go home. She'd declined those calls. Then Maria this morning. Then she'd called him. She'd found the number that Maria must have slipped into her contacts during the chaos of last night, and she'd called it. "I called him," she said. "Okay," Denise said. "I called him because of the publisher email. I wanted to know if he'd arranged it, and he said no." "Do you believe him?" Nora was quiet for a moment. "I believed him at the time," she said. That was an honest answer, and they both knew what it meant. Denise reached across and put her hand on top of Nora's, briefly, the way you do when words are insufficient, and presence is the only thing left. "What do you want to do?" Denise said. Nora looked at the article. She looked at her name in the 4th paragraph. linked to Maisie's name in the piece she'd written for the local paper 2 years ago, which she'd been proud of at the time and which now felt like a door she'd left unlocked without knowing it. I want to not be in this article, she said. I know. I want to not be in the video. I know. I want to have gone home last night after you told me to stop being guarded and just go on the date. She paused. I want to have not gone at all. Nora, I know. She pressed her fingers flat on the table. Old gesture, new table. I know that's not useful. What is useful right now? Nora thought about it. I need to know if that last paragraph is true, she said. And I need to know it from him, not from Maria, not from a journalist who talked to a man who was fired for humiliating someone. She stood up. From him. She called Lucian from the street outside her building. Not from inside, where Maisie could hear. She stood on the sidewalk in her weekend clothes jeans. A gray sweater that was one of her better ones, but was still just a sweater, and she stood with her back against the brick, and she called the number. He answered on the second ring. There's an article, she said. I know, he said. I saw it 20 minutes ago. The last paragraph. A pause. She heard him breathe. I need you to tell me the truth, she said. And I need you to not be diplomatic about it. I've had enough of people being diplomatic about things they've done to me. Her voice was level. She was keeping it level by force. Did you reach out to me because you were managing a situation? Was any part of last night? Or this morning? Or no, he said, that's not good enough. Nora, that's not good enough. The level in her voice shifted just slightly. Not breaking, moving. A man who worked for you gave a journalist enough information to put my name in a Tribune article next to words like controlling the narrative. I have a daughter. I have a manuscript I have been working on for 4 years. I have a publisher who reached out this morning, and I do not know if that is real or if that is... She stopped. I need more than no silence, on his end, not evasion. She knew what evasion sounded like. She'd been married to it for 8 years. This was different. This was a man deciding how much truth to offer, and landing on all of it. I told Maria to make sure you got home safe. Last night, when you left, I didn't call you. I had your number in my phone. Maria put it there, and I didn't call it because I didn't think I had the right. A pause. This morning, Maria called you because she felt she owed you information. That was her decision, not mine. The publisher, I asked Maria to find out who they were, if they were real, not to contact them. I asked because I wanted to know you weren't being used a second time by someone cashing in on the video. His voice was even and flat, and had none of the performance of someone managing a situation. You called me, and I answered because I wanted to hear your voice. The street was cold. Nora pressed her back against the brick. The last paragraph, she said. Rafe told the journalist what Rafe wanted the journalist to think, he said. Rafe is a man who needed a story where I was the villain and you were the piece I was trying to control. Because the alternative story, the one on that camera, makes him the thing he actually is. And what's that? A coward, Lucian said, who needed someone else's humiliation to feel powerful. Nora looked at the street. A woman walked past with a dog on a leash. A man on a bicycle. The ordinary Saturday morning of a city that didn't know or care about her name in an article, or her hands on a tablecloth, or the 4 years of a manuscript she'd been feeding in secret, like something she was afraid to let grow in the light. I don't know if I can trust you, she said. I know that, he said. I don't know if anything that happened last night was real. I don't know if the conversation we had the grandmother's recipe and the cheesecake, and she stopped. I don't know if I was just an audience for someone performing decency. I know that too, he said. And then, carefully, I can't tell you to trust me. That's not how trust works. I can tell you that what you experienced last night was real, from my side of the table. I can tell you that I had no idea what Rafe had arranged until it was already unraveling. And I can tell you that the reason I'm not managing this better right now is that the usual way I manage things doesn't apply here. Because you're not a situation. He paused. You're a person, and I'm out of practice with that distinction. Nora stood on the sidewalk. She breathed. There's going to be more, she said. More articles. More people with opinions about what I am in this story. And I have a daughter who is going to hear some of it. Yes, and I had a life that was very quiet and very mine, she said, and now it isn't. He didn't say anything to that. He let it be true, which was the only appropriate thing. I'm going to go back inside, she said. Okay, I'm going to take Maisie to the library like we planned. Okay, and I'm going to try to decide what I'm doing about the publisher email. Okay, and I am not making any decisions started again about whatever this is. Not today. That's fair, he said. She hung up. She stood on the sidewalk for one more moment. Then she went back inside, and she knocked on Maisie's door, and she said they were going to the library, and Maisie should put on her shoes. And Maisie said which shoes, and Nora said Annie's shoes, and Maisie said the ones with the lights were broken. And Nora said the blue ones then, and the conversation was the most normal thing that had happened in the last 14 hours, and she held on to it the entire walk to the library, like something load-bearing. By Saturday afternoon, the Tribune article had been shared 140,000 times. By Sunday morning, 2 more outlets had picked it up. The framing varied. One ran it as an investigation into organized crime. One ran it as a media piece about the ethics of viral videos. One, a women's interest site with a large readership, ran it with a headline focused entirely on Nora, with a sub-headline that read, "The plus-size author, who became the internet's unexpected heroine." Nora read that one at her kitchen table Sunday morning and felt a complicated, unpleasant mix of things that she couldn't have organized into a list if she'd tried. Gratitude, maybe, for the sympathy. Anger, definitely. At the framing heroine meant someone who had done something, had chosen something, and she had not chosen any of this. She had simply sat in a restaurant and tried not to cry. And underneath those 2 things, something smaller and older and harder to name. The awareness that the world had decided she was a story, and stories have shapes, and nobody was asking her what shape she wanted. Her phone had not stopped since Friday night. She'd stopped reading the messages from strangers, which ranged from people sharing their own stories of public humiliation, to people asking where they could buy her books to. On the uglier end, people who had decided for reasons she could not follow that she was somehow responsible for Lucian Vercetti's criminal associations being in a newspaper. She'd stopped reading those ones around page 2 of the comments and had not gone back. She had not stopped thinking about the publisher email. She'd read it 11 times. She knew this because she'd counted. The email was 2 paragraphs, professional and warm, in the way that people who work with children's books tend to be, and it requested her manuscripts plural, meaning they'd found more than one piece of her work somewhere, and it gave a name and a direct phone number, and it gave a name as to the current circumstance were overwhelming, but that they'd be glad to hear from her when she was ready. When she was ready. She'd been working on that manuscript for 4 years. She was 37 years old and she had never shown it to a publisher. And the reason she had never shown it to a publisher was a quiet voice in her head that sounded like Derek and said, "It's not ready," and "You're not ready," and "the market for this kind of thing is very competitive, Nora. You have to be realistic." A voice she had been having arguments with for 4 years and winning some of them and losing others and never quite managing to shut it up entirely. She sat at her kitchen table with her phone in her hand, and she thought about what Lucian had said. That's not a niche. That's most people's childhoods. She thought about Maisie on the bathroom counter. "You look pretty, Mom. You just don't look like you believe it yet." She picked up her phone. She called the number in the email. It rang 3 times, and then a woman answered, warm and unhurried, and said her name was Catherine, and Nora said her name was Nora Bellamy. And there was a pause on the other end, and then Catherine said, "Miss Bellamy, I'm so glad you called," and said it the way people say things when they mean them. And Nora pressed her back against her chair and held the phone with both hands and said, "I have 2 completed manuscripts and sent in, and a 3rd one that's about 60% done." And her voice only did the thing it wasn't supposed to do on the last 3 words, and she got through it anyway. Monday arrived like a correction. The weekend had been noise. Monday was the moment the noise arranged itself into something with edges. Lucian's attorney, a woman named Elaine Marsh, who had been managing the legal periphery of his affairs for 7, and who had the expression of someone who had seen everything and been surprised by nothing for at least the last 4 of them, sat across from him at 8 in the morning with a yellow legal pad and told him exactly what they were facing. The Tribune was running a follow-up. Daniel Reese had been busy. Rafe had given him enough to build a structure, and Reese was the kind of journalist who understood that structures needed to be verified. And he'd been verifying since Saturday. 2 of the 3 things Rafe had described in his interview had been confirmed through other channels, not well enough to name directly, but well enough to include. The Gary arrangement, Elaine said. "Yes, that's the most exposed," she said. "The other 2 can be explained." The Gary arrangement, she paused. "Lucian, I know. If Reese has what I think he has, and he runs it, I know, Elaine, that's not a civil matter. That crosses into... I know what it crosses into." He kept his voice even. Not because he wasn't feeling the weight of it, he was, but because showing the weight didn't make it lighter. What are our options? Elaine looked at her pad. Preemptive disclosure, which opens other doors we don't want open. Injunction, which we'd lose, and which would look like suppression. Or she stopped. Or you give Reese something else, she said. Something larger. Something that makes the Gary arrangement a footnote in a bigger story. Lucian looked at her. What kind of something? He said. Kind that demonstrates cooperation, she said carefully. With a different kind of institution. He understood what she was saying. He looked at the table. That's not a decision I make in a morning, he said. No, Elaine said. But it's a decision you may need to make before Wednesday. Because that's when Reese told our paralegal he's planning to file. Lucian nodded. He looked at the yellow legal pad, at the careful handwriting Elaine always used, the notes she'd been making during the conversation that would go into a file in her office that no one else touched. 7 years. She'd been managing the edges of his world for 7 years. He thought about what his world's edges looked like. There's one more thing, Elaine said. Tell me. Rafe didn't just give Reese the business information. She looked at him directly, which was something Elaine always did when the thing she was about to say was something she needed him to hear properly. He gave him Nora Bellamy. Lucian went still. What does that mean? His voice dropped. It means Rafe told Reese that the contact you've had with her since Friday night is part of a pattern of behavior. That you, his words, reported back to us through our own contact at the paper, that you collect leverage through personal relationships. Elaine held his gaze. He's suggesting, to a journalist at the Tribune, that you are cultivating a relationship with Nora Bellamy in order to control what she says about last Friday. The room was very quiet. Lucian did not move. He gave him the phone calls? Lucian said. He gave him enough. Rafe still has people inside who talk to him. She paused. We don't know exactly what Reese has, but we know he has enough to include her in the follow-up piece. Her name, Lucian said. Yes, and Maisie. Elaine's jaw tightened slightly. Her name was already in the original piece. The follow-up would go further. Lucian stood up. He didn't do it dramatically. He simply stopped being seated and walked to the window, and he stood there, and he thought about a woman on a sidewalk in a gray sweater, telling him she had a daughter and a manuscript and a life that had been very quiet and very hers. He thought about what it meant that Rafe had handed her to a journalist as a piece of leverage against him. He thought about what it meant that, in trying to hurt Lucian, Rafe had aimed at the most exposed person in the room. He thought about the fact that this was what he had built, not intentionally, not as the goal, but as the environment. A world where the people around him, when they wanted to cause damage, reached for the most vulnerable thing available. That was what his world produced. That was what a certain kind of power taught the people who lived nearest to it. Lucian, Elaine said. If the article runs with her name. He stopped. Started again. If Reese publishes anything connecting her to me in the way Rafe is framing it. It follows her, Elaine said. The manuscript, the publisher interest. Everything that's come from this week, it gets reframed. She paused. Instead of the story being about a woman who had a terrible Friday night, and who people responded to with kindness, the story becomes about whether she's connected to someone with your history. She lets that sit for a moment. That's the version of this, where her name means something it shouldn't. Lucian turned from the window. What does she know? He said. As of this morning, we don't know. He looked at Elaine. Get me Reese's number. Lucian, get me the number, Elaine. She looked at him for a moment with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to push back. Then she wrote a number on the legal pad, tore off the page, and slid it across the table. He picked it up. What are you going to do? She said. The thing Rafe didn't count on me doing, Lucian said. He called Reese from the stairwell. Not strategic. He just needed to be moving when he made the call, and the stairwell was where he'd ended up, and it had 14 flights, which was probably enough. Reese answered on the first ring. He'd been expecting the call, Lucian realized. Rafe had probably told him Lucian would call. Rafe understood enough about Lucian to know what would make him move. He hadn't counted on Lucian moving in this direction. Mr. Reese, Lucian said. Mr. Vercetti, I appreciate you calling. I'm not calling to negotiate, Lucian said. I'm calling to tell you something, and you can use it however you want. He paused. Nora Bellamy did not know who I was on Friday night. She did not know my name, what I do, or what my organization is. She attended a dinner that was arranged by people who worked for me without her knowledge of what it was. She left the restaurant before the end of the evening because she found out she'd been set up. He kept walking. 8th floor, 7th. Any contact between us since Friday night was initiated by her freely and has nothing to do with any strategy or leverage on my part. She is a woman with a daughter and a manuscript that's better than most of the things I've seen published in the last 5 years, and she has done nothing except exist in a room where something was done to her. 6th floor. If your article runs her name in the context of my organization, it does something to her that I am asking you not legally, not with any threat asking you as a person not to do. Silence on the other end. You're asking me to take her out of the story, Reese said. I'm asking you to tell the accurate version of what she is in the story, Lucian said, which is a woman who was used once already, not an extension of me. More silence. Mr. Vercetti, Reese said slowly, are you offering me something in exchange? No, Lucian said. Then why would I? Because it's accurate, Lucian said. And you're a journalist. The silence this time was different. Longer. The kind that means something is being weighed rather than managed. The Gary arrangement, Reese said. Lucian stopped walking. 3rd floor. What about it? Is it still active? Lucian stood on the 3rd floor landing with one hand on the railing and thought about 11 years of a particular kind of life and what it had taught the people nearest to him and what it had cost the people who couldn't get out of the way. No, he said. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. As of right now, Lucian said. As of this conversation. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. I'd need more than a phone call, Reese said finally. For that to be meaningful. I know, Lucian said. I'd need documentation, process, I know. And I'd still be running the story, Reese said carefully. I'm not in a position to run the story, Lucian said. Just don't run her. Another pause. I'll need to make some calls, Reese said. Make them, Lucian said. He hung up. He stood on the 3rd floor landing of his office building with his phone in his hand and thought about what he'd just said, not the last part, the part about Nora, but the middle part that had come out of him, like something that had been sitting behind a closed door for longer than he could accurately trace. No, as of right now, as of this conversation, he stood there with it. He'd said it without planning to. Yeah, without the thing he usually did when he said something significant, which was to be certain of it before he opened his mouth. He'd said it because Reese had asked directly, and something in him had answered before his strategy could catch up. He thought about what it meant. He thought about what the Gary arrangement connected to the names, the money, the people downstream of it who operated in the space between what was legal and what wasn't, who used his protection and his name, and the architecture he'd spent a decade building to do things that Lucian had told himself he wasn't responsible for because he didn't do them directly. He thought about the line he'd always kept in his mind between what he authorized and what he permitted, and how far that line had moved in 11 years, and whether there was a version of himself that would recognize the distance. He thought about what Maria had said. I thought you'd shut it down for your own pride. Not because of her. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Chicago area code. He opened it. It said the Tribune reporter called me. He wanted to confirm some things about Friday night. I told him the truth about what happened. I didn't say anything else. I thought you should know. A pause, rendered in text as a gap. Then I don't know what you said to him, but he told me my name wouldn't be in the follow-up piece. So whatever you did, thank you. Another gap. Don't read this as more than it is. I'm still deciding what to think about all of it. N. Lucian stood on the 3rd floor landing and read the text 3 times. Then he put his phone in his pocket and stood there for a moment longer in the quiet of a stairwell that had no view and no windows, just the flat cement reality of a building doing what buildings do. He thought about 11 years. He thought about the Gary arrangement and the 2 names in municipal infrastructure and the building on West Erie and the 14 flights of stairs and the office at the top of them and the shape of the life he'd built, what it had cost, what it produced, what it taught the people who stood nearest to it. He thought about a woman who had walked into a restaurant in a dark green dress expecting the worst and had still almost shown up. He thought about his grandmother making sauce on Sundays. He thought about what kind of legacy he was building, and whether, if his grandmother could see it from wherever she was, she would recognize the boy she'd fed. He started walking up the stairs, not toward the exit, toward the office. There were calls to make and documents to pull, and a conversation he'd been postponing for longer than he could justify, with people who needed to hear from him before they heard from anyone else. He walked up all 14 flights. By the time he reached the top, something had settled in him that hadn't been settled when he started down. Not peace, not resolution, just direction. He opened the door to his floor, and he walked down the hall, and he sat at his desk, and he picked up the phone, and he dialed the number that meant there was no version of the next chapter of his life that looked like the last of 11 years. The line connected. "This is Lucian Vercetti," he said. "I need to speak with someone in your financial crimes division." A pause. "I have information I'd like to discuss." Voluntarily. The voice on the other end of the line was careful, in the way that people who have been trained to receive unexpected information are careful, not surprised exactly, but recalibrating in real time, the way a compass adjusts when you move it near something magnetic. "Mr. Vercetti," the man said. His name was Halford. Agent Halford, though Lucian hadn't asked for the first name and Halford hadn't offered it. "You understand that anything you say in this conversation can be—" "I understand what it can be," Lucian said. "That's why I'm saying it." Pause. Brief and professional. "All right, tell me what you'd like to discuss." Lucian looked at his desk. The surface of it, the files, the pen he'd set down 20 minutes ago when Elaine was still in the room, the phone that had Nora's text still open on the screen before he'd put it face down. "Not on the phone," he said. "I want to come in." Another pause. "When?" Halford said. "Today," Lucian said. "This afternoon." "Before I talked myself out of it." He said the last part without meaning to. It came out before the part of him that managed his image could intercept it, and it sat in the air between him and a federal agent on a Monday morning, and he left it there because taking it back would have been worse. Halford cleared his throat. "I can have someone available at 2 o'clock. "I'll be there at 2, Lucian said. He hung up. He sat for exactly 30 seconds. Then he picked up the other phone and called Maria. She answered with the tone of someone who had been waiting for the next thing to land. "Yeah, I need you to pull everything on the Gary arrangement," he said. "Every document we have, every name, every transaction record from the last 4 years." Silence. Lucian. "Now, Maria, do you understand what you—" "Yes. If you walk in there with those documents—" "I know what happens," he said. "Pull the files." She was quiet for 3 full seconds. He counted again, same as he'd counted when Reese had first called. Different kind of silence this time. This one had the quality of someone watching a building they've lived in for years begin to come down. "Okay," she said. Her voice had changed. Not weak or something else. Like she'd made a decision of her own inside those 3 seconds. "I'll have them ready by noon." "Thank you, Lucian." Her voice caught on something for just a moment and then was steady again. "Are you sure?" He thought about 14 flights of stairs. About the weight of each one. "No," he said. "Pull the files anyway." He didn't tell Elaine where he was going. He told her he had a meeting at 2 and would be back in the office by 5, which was true in its component parts if not in its total meaning, and Elaine had the look of a woman who understood she was being given partial egg and was filing partial information and was filing her objection in the place where she filed things she couldn't stop. He took his own car. Not the one Marcus usually drove his own, the black sedan he kept in the lower garage, and drove himself on the occasions when he needed to be somewhere, without anyone knowing he was going there. He'd bought it 6 years ago precisely for this purpose, which had always been things like meetings he didn't want traced back, conversations that needed to happen without the context of his usual entrances. He was aware, driving south on Michigan Avenue toward the federal building, that he was using it now for its intended purpose, in a way that inverted everything he'd originally intended it for. His hands were steady on the wheel. That surprised him a little. He'd expected something physical to register the particular tightness in his chest that came with decisions that couldn't be unmade. But his hands were steady, and his breathing was even, and what he felt underneath everything was not fear. It was something closer to clarity. He'd made decisions before that he knew were wrong. He'd made them carefully, with full understanding of what they were, and he'd built structures around them to make them manageable, and then built more structures to manage the first structures, and somewhere in the middle of that architecture, he'd stopped being able to see clearly what the thing in the center of it actually was. He could see it now. He parked 2 blocks from the building and walked. The November air was cold without being brutal, Chicago's brief window between bearable and punishing, and he walked with his hands in his coat pockets and thought about Rafe. Rafe, who had looked at a woman walking into a restaurant and seen an instrument. Rafe, who had spent 6 years watching Lucian and learning not what was strong about him, but what was easy. The shortcuts, the places where power was more convenient than conscience. He'd built that, maybe not deliberately, but he'd built it. The building was ordinary from the outside. Federal buildings tend to be. He went through security, gave his name, waited in a chair that was designed to be functional rather than comfortable, and thought about nothing in particular for 11 minutes until a woman appeared and said Agent Halford would see him now. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. He didn't tell them everything. He'd talked to Elaine long enough over the years to understand that cooperation and capitulation were different things, and that the difference was the thing that determined whether you walked out of a room with any part of your future intact. He told them enough. He told them the Gary arrangement in enough detail to be verifiable. He told them 2 of the 3 municipal names, not the third, the one he'd protected longest, because there were people downstream of that name whose exposure was a different kind of problem, and he needed to handle it differently. He gave them transaction records for 18 months, which Maria had printed and banded, and left in a folder on his desk without a note, without a word, just the folder where he could find it. Halford was younger than he'd sounded on the phone. Late 30s, dark suit, the kind of methodical attention in his eyes that meant he was tracking everything and filing it before the sentence even finished. There was another agent present, a woman named Torres, Sr., who said very little and wrote constantly in a notebook that she held below the table as if she was trying to obscure the amount she was recording. When Lucian finished, Halford set down his pen. "Why now?" he said. Lucian looked at him. "What? Why today? Why not 6 months ago? Why not 2 years ago?" He leaned back slightly. "What changed?" Lucian thought about how to answer that. He thought about a restaurant on a Friday night, about a room full of people who'd laughed at a woman they'd never met, and about the specific quality of that laugh, the comfort in it, the ease, the absolute absence of any consideration of the person on the receiving end. He thought about looking at Rafe and recognizing, in that laugh, something he'd permitted, something that had grown in the soil of his world, because his world had taught people that power meant you didn't have to think about the ones without it. "Someone showed me what my environment produces," he said. Halford studied him for a moment. Torres wrote something in her notebook. "We'll need to verify what you've given us," Halford said. "That will take time. During that time, we'd ask that you—" "I understand what you'd ask," Lucian said. "I have an attorney. You can route anything procedural through her." Halford nodded. "One more question." "Ask it." "Rafe Calder," Halford said. "He contacted us as well, this morning." Lucian didn't move. "He gave us a great deal of information," Halford said carefully. "Some of which overlaps with what you've given us. Some of which doesn't." "What does the part that doesn't overlap cover?" Lucian said. "You," Halford said, specifically. The room was very quiet. "He's framing himself as a witness," Torres said. First words she'd spoken in 40 minutes. Her voice was even and dry and precise. "Against you." Lucian looked at her. "He came to you before I called this morning," Lucian said. "Yes," Torres said. "He knew I'd call." "He anticipated it," she said. "He wanted to be first." Lucian sat with that. Rafe had known. Of course he'd known 6 years of watching Lucian move through situations. 6 years of understanding that when Lucian's back was truly against a wall, he went toward the pressure rather than away from it. Rafe had used that knowledge the same way he used everything, not to build something, but to position himself where he'd be safe when the structure came down. He'd tried to turn Lucian's own instincts against him. "What does his version look like?" Lucian said. "We're not going to share that," Halford said. "Generally," Lucian said, without specifics. Halford glanced at Torres. Torres looked at Lucian with the flat assessment of someone who had sat across from a significant number of people in rooms like this one and had learned to categorize them accurately and quickly. "His version," she said, "positions you as the architect of everything and himself as someone who carried out instructions under duress. He has documentation he claims supports that framing." A pause. "Some of it is fabricated. We know that already. Some of it isn't. The parts that aren't," Lucian said, "are going to require careful sorting," she said, "which is why what you've given us today is useful. It establishes your version independently. My version," Lucian said, "is that I built something and I'm responsible for it." "That's not a version. That's accurate." Torres looked at him for a moment. She wrote something. He was back in his car by 4:40. He sat in it for a moment without starting it. The street outside was doing the ordinary Monday, late afternoon thing, people moving, traffic. The city's in its endless metabolic churn, and he sat in the driver's seat of the car he'd bought for clandestine meetings and looked at the steering wheel and thought about the fact that the most consequential thing he'd done in 11 years had Just happened in a room that looked like a conference room at an unremarkable accounting firm. His phone had 17 missed calls. He looked through them. 6 from a number he didn't recognize, 3 from Maria, 2 from Elaine, who was going to have thoughts about the afternoon, 1 from Marcus, 1 from the building's property manager, which was probably unrelated, 1 from Victor Ashford, which was definitely not unrelated, 1 from Nora. He looked at that one for a moment. Then he called Maria. She answered before the first ring finished. "Tell me it went the way I think it went," she said. "It went the way it went," he said. "Lucius Rafe was there first," he said. "This morning. He went to them before I called." A sharp inhale. "He's positioning as a witness." "Yes. That means he's been planning this since I told him to leave Friday night," Lucian said. "He had the weekend. He had 6 years," Maria said. "He's been building a version of events that protects him if this ever—" She stopped. "He never trusted that you wouldn't turn on him eventually. He trusted it enough to stay for 6 years. That's different," Maria said. "That's proximity, not trust. He stayed because it was useful. He built his exit because he wasn't sure." A pause. "We need to get Elaine on the phone," Lucian said. "Tell her everything. Don't protect me from the parts she won't like." "I know what she's going to say," he said. "Tell her anyway." "Okay, a breath. What else?" He looked at the missed call from Nora. "Nothing right now," he said. "I'll call you in an hour." He hung up. He called Nora. She answered on the third ring. Her voice had a texture to it that he recognized not from knowing her long enough to have a catalog of her states, but from the conversation on the sidewalk that morning. Controlled, careful, managing something. "You called," he said. "Yes." A pause. "I got another call."
"From the Tribune?"
"Reese?" "Yes, he told me he'd spoken with you." She paused. "He told me my name wasn't going in the follow-up piece." "That's what he told me too. He also told me—" She stopped. Pause had a different quality. "He told me that the follow-up piece was going to be significant, that there were things about your organization that were—" She didn't finish. "I know what's in the piece," Lucian said. "Is it accurate?" He looked at the steering wheel. "Most of it," he said. "The silence was the kind that doesn't have a direction yet." "Lucian," she said. "Yes. I don't—" She started and stopped. He heard something that might have been her moving through a room, a sound of footsteps, a door. The quality of the background noise shifting. She was somewhere private now. "I don't know what I walked into," she said. "Friday night. I thought I was going on a date. I thought the worst thing that could happen was that someone was going to be rude to me, and I was going to have to take a cab home and call Denise." A breath. "I didn't know I was walking into—" She stopped again. "I know," he said. "I need you to stop saying that," she said, and there was a flash in her voice, not quite anger, something more precise than that. "You keep saying I know. Tell me something I don't know." He thought about the federal building, about Torres and Halford, and the folder of documents that were right now in the hands of people who would use them to dismantle pieces of the structure he'd spent 11 years building. "I walked into a federal building this afternoon," he said. "I gave them information about the parts of my organization that shouldn't have existed. I did it voluntarily." A pause. "That's what I know that you don't know." Absolute silence. He waited. "Why are you telling me this?" she said finally. "Because you asked for something true." She exhaled. "That's not a small thing." "No," he said, "it's not." "Are you?" She stopped. "What happens to you now?" "I don't know yet," he said. "That's also true." A long pause. "Lucian." Her voice had changed again. The control was still there, but there was something underneath it now, something that had moved. "I'm scared of what this week is going to look like. For me, for Maisie. I have a publisher who wants my manuscript, and I have my name in a newspaper article next to yours. And I have a 9-year-old who asked me this morning why there were people outside our building." He sat forward. "People outside your building?" "2 of them. With cameras. They've been there since this morning. Patricia scared them off the stoop, but they're on the sidewalk." A pause. "I didn't leave until they moved down the block, and I used the side door." He was already reaching for his phone. "I'm going to have someone." "No," she said. "No," she said again, more firmly. "I don't want your people outside my building. I don't want anyone outside my building who's connected to you. I know you mean it as protection, but it doesn't feel like protection. It feels like—" She stopped. "It feels like I'm becoming part of your world without being asked." He stopped reaching for the phone. She was right. He sat with that. "Okay," he said. "I need to figure out how to handle this myself," she said. "I've been handling things myself for a long time." "I know that," he said. "Then stop trying to manage my perimeter," she said, and there was something almost like dark humor in it, just a thread of it. which was the first moment in the conversation that felt like both of them breathing at the same time. He almost smiled. Okay, he said again. I'm going to talk to the publisher this week, she said. I'm going to send them the manuscript. Good. I'm terrified, she said. That's real. I want you to know that's real. I know, he said. And then, because she'd called him on it, that's not nothing. The terrified part, it means it matters. A pause. It means it matters, she repeated quietly. Yeah. Okay, she breathed. Okay. Be careful, Lucian. She hung up. He started the car. The Tribune piece ran Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. Lucian read it at his kitchen table at 6:15, with a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm because he'd forgotten to drink it, which was a thing that happened to him only under specific kinds of pressure. Piece was thorough and accurate, and written with the particular care of a journalist who understood accuracy was the most powerful tool he had. Rees had been careful. He'd been fair in the specific way that fairness is damaging presenting information without editorializing, letting the facts carry the weight, which meant the weight was considerable. The Gary arrangement was described in detail that could only have come from Rafe, plus the documents Lucian had given them, which together built a picture that was, as Torres had said, going to require careful sorting. Lucian's voluntary contact with the Financial Crimes Division was mentioned in the final third of the article. 3 paragraphs. Factual, careful, attributed to sources familiar with the investigation. It was the first official confirmation that Lucian Vercetti had walked into a federal building and made a choice that nobody in his world had expected him to make. Nora's name was not in the article. He read it twice to confirm. Her name was not there. He set down the paper he'd had it printed, which was an old habit. Greens felt wrong for things that mattered, and he looked at his kitchen and thought about the 11 years of decisions that had built the version of his life that was being described in 1,300 words on the front page of the Tribune. His phone started ringing at 6:22 and didn't meaningfully stop for the next 4 hours. Victor Ashford called at 6:22 exactly, which meant he'd been watching the Tribune's site and had the piece open before most of the city was awake. You went to them, Victor said. No greeting. Yes. Without calling me. Yes. Lucian. Victor's voice had a quality to it that Lucian had heard before, not anger, something older and more specific. The voice of a man confronting a decision he can't reverse, that affects things he built. Do you understand what this does to the arrangements we have and 3 other? I understand what it does, Lucian said. That's why I did it before you could talk me out of it. Silence. That's what you think I would have done, Victor said. I know what you would have done, Lucian said. You would have been reasonable and measured, and you would have made a compelling case for a different path, and you would have been right about every particular and wrong about the whole thing. He paused. I didn't have time for that conversation. The Gary arrangement exposes. I know what it exposes, Victor. People who have been operating under the assumption that those people are going to need to make their own decisions, Lucian said. I can't make them for them. Victor was silent for a long moment. Why? He said finally. The question was small and direct and stripped of the usual architecture. Lucian thought about how to answer. He thought about Rafe's laugh in a restaurant. He thought about what his world taught, people who lived nearest to it. Because someone showed me what I was building, he said, and I didn't like what I saw. Victor hung up without responding. Lucian set the phone on the table. It rang again immediately. Elaine this time. I've seen it, she said. Yes. The voluntary disclosure paragraph. Yes. She stopped. He heard her exhale through her nose, which was her specific sound for professional frustration. That changes the liability picture significantly. I know. In your favor, she said. I want to be clear, it changes it in your favor. The voluntary nature matters. Opens doors, he said. Opens doors, she confirmed. People are going to come through those doors, Lucian. People who've been operating in your shadow for years. They're going to have their own decisions to make, and some of them are going to decide that you're the best available landing pad. I know, Rafe's positioning as a witness changes with this piece, she said. He was first, but first doesn't mean most credible. The voluntary disclosure makes him look reactive by comparison. A pause. Your attorney advises you that this was... She stopped. Started again. I would not have advised this path. I know, but I can work with it, she said. I need to make some calls. Make them, he said. She hung up. The coffee was fully cold now. He drank it anyway. The calls he didn't answer went to voicemail, and by 9 in the morning there were 23 of them. People he'd known for years, and people he'd done business with, and one person he genuinely hadn't expected to hear from a man named Costa, who ran a legitimate import business that had been, for the last 3 years, entirely untouched by anything Lucian's organization did, but whose name was in the vicinity of the Gary arrangement in a way that was going to require a conversation. He called Costa back. Costa answered with the tight, contained fury of a man who had built something clean and was looking at the possibility of it being described as dirty. "Tell me how bad," Costa said. "Your name doesn't appear in anything I gave them," Lucian said. "That's the truth. Your name appears in my records," Costa said. "Our legitimate records, the consulting arrangement." "Which is legitimate," Lucian said. "Which was legitimate when I signed it," Costa said. "Which is going to look like anything but that to a federal investigator who's looking for places where clean money and dirty money might have." "Costa," Lucian cut through it. "I know what it looks like. I'm telling you, your name is not in anything I provided. If they come to you, you cooperate fully, and you show them exactly what you have, because what you have is clean." A pause. "I made sure it stayed clean." A long silence. "Why?" Costa said. "Because your business is clean," Lucian said, "and I needed it to stay that way. For my own reasons. Those reasons turned out to be the right ones." Costa was quiet. "You protected my exposure," he said slowly, "while building everything else." "Yes, I don't know how to feel about that," Costa said. "Neither do I," Lucian said. "But there it is." Costa hung up. By 11, Rafe knew the article was out. Lucian knew this, because Maria called to tell him that Rafe had gone to ground, his apartment was empty, his phone was going to voicemail, and 2 people Maria had trusted to monitor the situation had reported that Rafe's car had not been at his parking space since sometime Monday afternoon. "He ran," Maria said. "He didn't run," Lucian said. "He repositioned." "What's the difference?" "Running is panic," Lucian said. "Repositioning is strategy. Rafe is scared, but he's not panicking. He went somewhere he thinks is safe, while he figures out whether the voluntary disclosure changes his leverage." "Does it?" "Yes," Lucian said. "It reduces it significantly." "So what does he do?" Maria said. "He looks for something I didn't give them," Lucian said. "He looks for the thing I protected." Maria went quiet. "The third name," she said. "Yes." "Does he know it?" "He knows enough to point in the right direction," Lucian said. "He doesn't have documentation, but directions can be enough." "Lucian," her voice was tight. "If he gives them that name before you do." "I know. That's not just exposure for you. That person has a family." "That person has—" "I know," he said. "I'm going to call them today." "And say what?" "The truth," he said. "That it's time." Mireya didn't say anything for a moment. "Okay," she said finally. "One more thing," he said. "Nora, there are photographers outside her building. I saw that in the overnight brief. I told her I wouldn't send anyone." "I know you did," Mireya said. "I heard it in your voice when you said her name." He ignored that. "Is there a Wagley?" Mireya said. "Give me an hour. There are legal options for managing unauthorized press presence at a private residence. She doesn't need to know where the call came from." "Don't deceive her," he said. "A beat. I'll make sure she knows it's being handled," Mireya said, without specifics. "Fine." He was reached to hang up when Mireya said his name. "Yeah, the article," she said. "The voluntary disclosure paragraph." A pause. "I read it 3 times. "Okay, it's its sources familiar with the investigation." Another pause. "That's not Reese editorializing. That means they confirmed it officially. Which means when you walked into that building yesterday, they were expecting me to be useful," he said. "They already considered you cooperative," she said, "before you even got there. Lucian, who told them to expect you." He thought about it. He thought about Halford answering on the first ring. He thought about Torres being in the room already, notebook ready before the second sentence. He thought about Reese getting Nora's name removed with a single phone article, which was not how journalism worked unless there was a reason for the journalist to want you cooperative. "Reese," he said. "Reese called them," Mireya said. "After you called him Monday morning. He called them and told them you were going to come in voluntarily. Which is why they had a senior agent in the room," Lucian said. "Reese brokered it," Mireya said. "He used the article as leverage. I won't name her if you go in voluntarily, but he also set it up to be received before you got there." Lucian sat with that. "Reese is smarter than Rafe thought he was," Lucian said. "Everyone is smarter than Rafe thought they were," Mireya said. That was always the problem. She hung up. At 12:30, Lucian got in his car, not toward the federal building this time. He drove west, into a neighborhood where the buildings were shorter and the streets were older, and the address he had was for a house with a blue door that he'd been to 3 times in 11 years, and each of those times had been for dinners that were ostensibly social, and were actually about maintaining the kind of relationship that didn't appear in any document. He rang the bell. The man who opened the door was 64 years old. His name was Gerald Fitch. He was publicly a retired city planning administrator with a pension and a vegetable garden, and 2 adult children who called him regularly. He was, less publicly, one of the 2 municipal names Lucian had given Halford, which meant Gerald Fitch had approximately 4 hours before someone arrived at his blue door who was not Lucian. Fitch looked at him. "You've seen the article," Lucian said. Fitch stepped back from the door. "Come in." The kitchen smelled like coffee and something with onions. Domestically, completely ordinary. The kitchen of a man who had been living an ordinary life in the public portion of his existence for 30 years. "How much time do I have?" Fitch said. "Today," Lucian said. "Maybe tomorrow morning. After that, it depends on how fast they're moving." Fitch sat down at his kitchen table. He had the look of a man who'd been carrying the awareness of this moment for years, not surprise, just arrival. The way a person looks when the thing they've been dreading finally walks through the door and turns out to be real. "My daughter is in Springfield," he said. "She's pregnant. 7 months. Lucian looked at him. "No," Fitch said. "I know that's not." He stopped. "I know. Your documentation," Lucian said. "Anything that shows the arrangement from your side." "I have it." "Get it together," Lucian said. "Call your own attorney, not mine. Yours before 2 o'clock. Tell them you're going in voluntarily. Tell them you have documentation." He paused. "The voluntary nature matters. I know that from this week." Fitch looked at him for a long moment. "You walked in yesterday," he said. "The article." "Yes. You came here to give me the chance to do the same," Fitch said. "I came here to give you the information you need," Lucian said. "What you do with it is yours." Fitch was quiet. "Rafe is going to give them your name," Lucian said. "He doesn't have documentation, but he has enough to point. You have a window to be first." A pause. "I needed you to know." Fitch looked at his hands on the table. 11 years, he said. Not to Lucian exactly, just to the air in the kitchen. 11 years, Lucian said. He stood up. "The arrangement," Fitch said. "The things he stopped. I always told myself it wasn't hurting anyone." Lucian looked at him. "I know," he said. "I told myself a version of the same thing." He picked up his coat. "Call your attorney, Gerald." He left. He was back on Michigan Avenue by 2. His phone rang as he was parking. Unknown number. He answered out of the specific habit of a man who'd learned that unknown numbers were frequently the most important calls. "This is Daniel Reese," the voice said. "I figured you'd call," Lucian said. "Peace is running well," Reese said. He didn't sound triumphant. He sounded like a man describing weather conditions accurate and uninvested. "There's a follow-up I'm planning for Thursday. I want to give you the opportunity to mine it." "What's the Thursday piece?" Lucian said. "The aftermath," Reese said. "The broader implications of the voluntary disclosure." And a pause. "Nora Bellamy." Lucian went still. "You said..." "Her name is not in Tuesday's piece," Reese said. "I kept my word. Thursday's piece is different. Thursday's piece is about what happened to her after Friday night. Publisher interest. The manuscript. A pause. The public response. 2 million people watched her sit in a restaurant and hold herself together. There's a story there that has nothing to do with you." "Then why are you telling me?" Lucian said. "Because I want to reach her directly," Reese said. "And I want to do it in a way that doesn't feel like it comes from your world." Lucian looked at the street. "I can't make that call for her," he said. "I know," Reese said. "But you can tell her I'm going to reach out, so she knows it's coming, and it's not a surprise." He thought about a sidewalk and a gray sweater. "I don't want to become part of your world without being asked." "I'll tell her," he said. "That's all I'll do. That's all I'm asking," Reese said. He hung up. Lucian sat in the parked car. He called Nora. She answered fast, which meant she'd been near her phone, which meant the day had been the kind of day where you stay close to the thing that connects you to information. "Reese is going to call you," he said, "for Thursday's piece. It's about you, not me. He wants to tell your story." A long pause. "My story," she said, "the manuscript. Publisher. What happened to you after Friday night?" She was quiet for a moment. "Is this your doing?" she said. "No," he said. 2 million people watched that video and decided you mattered. That's not me. That's them," she breathed. "What should I do?" she said. "Whatever you want," he said. "That's the part that's entirely yours." She was quiet long enough that he thought the call had dropped. "Okay, you'll call him?" "Okay, I'll think about it," she said. "It's enough." Another pause. Different quality. Less sharp. "You went to the federal building," she said. "Yes, the article mentioned it. Yes, are you..." She stopped. He heard her choose a different question. "What happens now?" "I don't know exactly," he said. but it's moving in the direction it needs to move. Are you scared? She asked. He thought about it honestly. I'm uncomfortable, he said, which is different. Scared means you don't know what you chose. Uncomfortable means you know exactly what you chose and you're living in it. He was quiet. That's an honest answer, she said. I'm trying, he said. He was still sitting in the parked car when a black SUV he didn't recognize pulled up 30 feet ahead of him on the street and sat there without pulling fully into a parking space, engine running. He looked at it. The windows were dark. He looked at his mirrors. Another car, different, older gray sedan, was parked behind him. It had been there when he pulled in. He hadn't clocked it at the time. Clocked it now. Nora, he said. Yeah, I need to call you back. What's? I'll call you back, he said. His voice was even. This is not a conversation about us. He heard her register the shift. Okay, she said, and hung up without making it complicated. He set his phone on the passenger seat. He looked at the SUV. He looked at the gray sedan in the mirror. He thought about Rafe, who was not panicking but repositioning, and who had spent 6 years learning how Lucian moved, and who understood that the voluntary disclosure had cost him the leverage he'd thought he had. He thought about what a man does when his leverage is gone and he's still angry. He thought about a journalist and a federal agent and a folder of documents, and Gerald Fitch's kitchen and 11 years of decisions stacked like floors in a building he'd just started dismantling from the ground up. He thought about the fact that he was sitting in a parked car on Michigan Avenue between two vehicles that had not been there 5 minutes ago, and that the specific configuration of them, one ahead, one behind, both at angles that made pulling out difficult, was not accidental. His phone lit up. Not a call. A text from a number he didn't have saved. That said 4 words. Get out of the car. He looked at the text. He looked at the SUV ahead. He looked at the gray sedan behind. He thought about Rafe, who was not running but repositioning, and about what a man does when the legal options have narrowed, and the emotional temperature has been climbing since Friday night. And the one thing he'd built his identity around, proximity to power, had just been publicly and permanently revoked. He thought about the specific kind of anger that produces texts like the one on his screen. He put his hand on the door handle. His other hand found his phone. He dialed Maria. She answered in one ring. Michigan and Erie, he said. Right now, black SUV front, gray sedan rear, no plates visible on either. I'm sending fast, he said. 3 minutes, she said. He looked at the SUV. The door of it opened. Not all the way. Just enough for him to see the shape of someone in the driver's seat, shifting their weight. 3 minutes. He kept his hand on his own door handle and did not move and breathed evenly, and thought about the fact that every decision he'd made in the last 4 days had narrowed his world to exactly this: a car, a street, 2 unknown vehicles, and the specific outcome of 11 years catching up with him in the only way that kind of architecture ever truly concludes, all at once, in a single converging moment, with no version of the next minute that didn't require him to commit fully to something. The SUV door opened wider. Lucian opened his. The door swung open, and Lucian stepped out onto Michigan Avenue, with his phone still in his hand and his coat open in the November cold, and the particular clarity that arrives when a situation has compressed itself down to its essential facts. The essential facts were these: the SUV ahead, the gray sedan behind, a text from a number he didn't have saved, and Rafe Calder, who was not panicking but repositioning, and who had spent 6 years learning exactly how Lucian moved through pressure. The driver's door of the SUV opened fully. The man who stepped out was not Rafe. He was younger, late 20s, broad through the shoulders, wearing a jacket that was too light for the weather, in the way that people wear jackets that are too light when they have something underneath that adds bulk. He stopped beside the SUV's open door and looked at Lucian across the 30 feet of sidewalk between them, with the flat, waiting expression of someone who has been told to deliver a message and is calculating the best method. Behind Lucian, the gray sedan's engine idled. He did not look back at it. He looked at the man by the SUV. Rafe sent you, Lucian said. Not a question. Loud enough to carry. The man said nothing for a moment. Then he wants to talk. Rafe knows where my office is, Lucian said. He's not interested in your office. Then he can call my attorney. The man shifted his weight. Mr. Vercetti. He's asking for 30 minutes. Somewhere quiet, that's all. Lucian looked at him. He thought about what Rafe wanted, from 30 minutes somewhere quiet. He thought about what Rafe had left: no organization, no protection, No leverage of the kind he'd thought he had. Before the Tribune piece ran, he thought about a man who had spent 6 years adjacent to power and had confused the proximity with the thing itself, and what happened to a man like that when the proximity ended. He thought about the gray sedan behind him. Where? Lucian said. He'll come to you, the man said. He just wants to know you'll be there. Tell him to call my personal line, Lucian said. Directly. No intermediaries. The man studied him. He said you'd say that, the man said. Then he already knows the answer, Lucian said. He turned and walked back to his car. He did not walk fast, and he did not look back at the gray sedan, even when he heard it shift into gear behind him. And when he got into his car and closed the door and put his hands on the wheel, they were still steady, which he noted with the detached awareness of a man taking inventory of himself under specific conditions. His phone rang. Maria. 2 minutes out. What's the situation? Stand down, he said. Lucian. They're messengers, he said. Not a threat. Stand down. A pause. You're sure? If Rafe wanted to do something stupid, he'd have done it somewhere that wasn't Michigan Avenue at 2 in the afternoon. He watched the gray sedan pull away from the curb in his rearview mirror. He wanted to see if I'd flinch. Did you? No, he said. Good. A breath. Did he get what he actually wanted? Lucian watched the sedan disappear into traffic. He got confirmation that I'll take his call, he said, which means he's still negotiating. He paused, which means he's more scared than I thought. He hung up. He sat in the car for another moment. Then Rafe called. The voice that came through the phone was not the voice Lucian had known for 6 years. Not entirely. 6 years of Rafe Calder had been a particular texture confident, slightly theatrical. The voice of a man who'd learned early that performance was more efficient than substance, and had built his entire operating style around that discovery. The voice on the phone now had the same cadence, but the substance underneath it had shifted the way a piece of furniture shifts when you discover the legs are hollow. You didn't flinch, Rafe said. No, Lucian said. I wasn't sure you would. Yes, you were, Lucian said. That's why you did it that way. A pause. I need you to pull back the disclosure, Rafe said. Lucian looked at the steering wheel. That's not how it works. There are things in those documents that implicate. I know what's in them, Lucian said. I gave them. Lucian. The theatricality was gone now. What was left was rawer, and in some ways more honest than anything Rafe had shown him in 6 years. What I gave Reese, the things I told him I was angry. You were angry, Lucian said. Yes, and you went to a journalist and you went to federal agents, and you gave them information designed to damage me while protecting yourself. That was not an accident, Rafe. That was a plan. Silence. I needed to protect myself, Rafe said. I know, Lucian said. I did the same thing. The difference is what we chose to protect. What does that mean? It means I walked in voluntarily, and you tried to use the back door, Lucian said. The outcome of that difference is what you're calling me about. Another silence. Longer. What does cooperation look like, Rafe said. The words came out flat and stripped, like he'd rehearsed something else and abandoned it. Not my decision, Lucian said. Call Halford. Directly. Tell them you want to revise your previous statement. Bring documentation that's accurate rather than curated. He paused. Do it before Thursday. Why Thursday? Because that's when the window starts closing, Lucian said. After Thursday, you're not cooperating. You're caught. A very long silence. I humiliated that woman, Rafe said. The shift was so abrupt that Lucian didn't immediately respond. In the restaurant, Rafe said. His voice had changed again, something smaller in it now. Something that might have been the beginning of the thing people arrive at after the anger runs out, and what's left is just the thing they did. I sat there and I laughed and I filmed her and I thought it was... He stopped. Lucian waited. I had a daughter, Rafe said. She's 8. Her mother and I. He stopped again. She lives in Phoenix. Lucian looked at the street. I know, he said. I thought about what you said, Rafe said. That night, outside the restaurant. You said something about if someone did that to our daughters. Nora said that, Lucian said. Not me. Rafe was quiet. Right. Call Halford, Lucian said. Today. He hung up. He sat in the car for 3 minutes without moving. Then he drove back to his office. And he spent the rest of Tuesday in meetings with Elaine, and he did not allow himself to think about Rafe's voice, or Rafe's daughter in Phoenix, or the particular sound of 6 years of confidence, hollowing out over a phone call. Because there was work to do, and the work required the part of him that thought clearly rather than the part that felt things. And he had learned a long time ago how to make that separation when he needed it. The separation was getting harder than it used to be. He wasn't sure that was a bad thing. Nora called Reese on Wednesday morning. She made the call from her kitchen table, which had become, over the course of this week, the place where she made decisions. Not deliberately. It was just the table where Maisie ate breakfast, and where Nora drank tea, and where the ordinary logistics of their life got sorted out, and it had accumulated a kind of weight from all the significant phone calls of the last 5 days. And sitting there felt like having the right ground under her feet. Reese was professional and warm and careful in the way that she'd come to associate, through this week's specific education, with people who understood that they were asking for something and wanted the person they were asking to feel safe, saying no. She did not say no. She said yes with conditions. The conditions were, Maisie's last name would not appear. Peace would not speculate about her relationship with Lucian. The piece would be about the manuscript and what had happened to her professional life after Friday night. And if Reese wanted to include anything about the personal dimensions of the evening, he would share those specific paragraphs with her before publication. Reese agreed to all 3 conditions. "Can I ask you something off the record?" Reese said. "The conversation at the restaurant," he said, before everything unraveled. What was it like? She thought about it. She thought about Eleanor's lemon pound cake, and a man eating pasta without performing it, and the question about what age her books were for, and the answer he'd given that had hit somewhere specific and stayed there. "It was the most honest conversation I'd had in a long time," she said. Reese was quiet. "That's what I thought," he said. "From the camera angle." She sat with that. "You could see that from a camera angle?" she said. "Bellamy," Reese said, and his voice had something real in it. For the first time in the conversation, 2 million people could see it. She didn't say anything for a moment. "Run the piece," she said. Thursday's Tribune piece ran at 6 a.m. The headline was, "An Unpublished Author, a Viral Video, and the Manuscript That Found Its Moment." Nora read it at the kitchen table with her tea going cold, and Maisie read it over her shoulder, because Maisie had been awake since 5:30 with the specific early morning energy of a child who had processed the week's events in the background of her 9-year-old life and had arrived at Thursday. Morning with accumulated questions she was waiting for an appropriate moment to ask. Nora's name was in the headline and the first paragraph, and it had a weight to it. There, Nora Bellamy, named as a writer, an author, a woman with a manuscript that was different from every other time her name had appeared in something she hadn't written herself. Maisie read silently for 2 minutes. Then she said, "They spelled your name right." "Yes," Nora said. "And they said your book sounds like something kids actually want to read." Maisie pointed at a line in the 3rd paragraph. "That's good. That's very good," Nora said. "When does it come out?" "It has to be edited first," Nora said, "and designed. But it's real," Maisie said. Nora looked at her daughter. "It's real," she said. Maisie nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose project had passed a significant milestone. Then she went to get cereal, because she was 9, and the cereal was important regardless of what was happening in the newspaper. Nora sat with the article. She thought about Catherine from the publisher, who had read both completed manuscripts by Monday evening and called Tuesday morning with a voice that was warm and professional, and underneath both of those things, genuinely excited. She thought about the conversation they'd had, which had lasted an hour and 20 minutes, and during which Nora had taken 4 pages of notes and cried twice quietly, in the way she'd learned, so that Maisie wouldn't hear, and had agreed to a revision timeline that was ambitious but not impossible. She thought about 4 years. 4 years of writing in the early morning, before Maisie woke up, and in the late evening after Maisie was asleep, and on Thursday nights at the community writing group, and in the 20-minute windows between the things that real life required. 4 years of a voice in her head that sounded like Derek saying it's not ready, and her own voice underneath, that saying just wait a little longer, just until it's better, just until you're sure. She looked at her name in the newspaper. She was not sure. She was still not sure. The terror of it was still entirely present, sitting in her chest like something with weight and mass, because the terrified part meant it mattered, and the part that mattered meant it was real, and real things could fail in ways that imagined things couldn't, but it was real. She picked up her phone. She didn't call Lucian. She'd been thinking about that, when to call, what to say, what this thing between them actually was, in the daylight of a life that still had to be lived day by day, with a child and a mortgage and a winter coming, and now a manuscript in the hands of a publisher. She'd been thinking about the rain outside Crown Meridian and the way he'd answered her question without softening it, and what it meant that a man with his history had walked into a federal building on a Monday afternoon and told the truth about 11 years. She thought about what Maisie had said, looking at his face on the screen. Not mean serious, paying attention serious. She texted Denise instead. Read the Tribune. Then I'm okay. Actually okay. I'll call you later. Denise responded in 40 seconds with 5 consecutive emojis, and then I told you to go on that date. Nora put the phone face down on the table and laughed. Actually laughed. The kind that comes from somewhere real. And the sound of it, in her own kitchen on a Thursday morning, felt like something she'd been reaching for without knowing it. Rafe Calder walked into the federal building on Thursday morning at 9:47. He brought an attorney and a box of documents, and the specific defeated posture of a man who has exhausted all the versions of a story where he's the wronged party and has arrived, through process of elimination, at the version where he's accountable. Halford called Maria to confirm it at 10:15. Maria told Lucian at 10:20. Lucian was in a meeting with Elaine and 2 other people when she texted, and he read the text under the table, the way people read texts under tables in meetings. And he set his phone face down and finished the sentence he'd been in the middle of. And afterward, when the meeting broke and Elaine was gathering her papers, she looked at him with the expression of a woman who had decided something. What? He said. Nothing, she said. Elaine, she looked at him for a moment. 7 years. She'd been in his professional orbit for 7 years, which was long enough to have developed opinions about the arc of his decisions. You look different, she said. Different how? She thought about it. Like someone who stopped waiting for the other shoe, she said. He looked at her. Both shoes are on the floor, he said. That's the difference. She almost smiled. How's that feel? She did smile, then brief, contained. The smile of a woman who had given professional advice that was not taken, and had discovered that the alternative outcome was not the disaster she'd predicted. I'll call you about the Friday meeting, she said and left. Process of dismantling 11 years of a particular kind of life was neither dramatic nor swift. It was paperwork. It was phone calls that went long and arrived at conclusions that were unsatisfying in the way that legal conclusions are always unsatisfying. Not resolution, but adjustment. Not justice, but renegotiation. It was conversations with men who had operated in the periphery of his organization and who now needed to determine, individually, what their own situations looked like in the new configuration. Some of those conversations were hostile. Some were relieved in a way that suggested those men had been waiting for someone to change the structure for years. Most were somewhere between complicated, practical, shaped by specific fear and specific calculation, which was how most things in his world got shaped. The Gary arrangement was formally dissolved. The documentation Lucian had provided gave investigators enough to close it from the outside, and the 2 municipal names cooperated Gerald Fitch, who had called his attorney by 2 o'clock on Tuesday, as Lucian had advised, and the second name, who had found out about Fitch's cooperation and made the same calculation within an hour. The Gary arrangement had been feeding money through a logistics company for 4 years. The logistics company's owner was not someone Lucian had ever met directly, which was, Elaine explained, both his most significant legal protection and his most significant moral failure, and she said the second part in exactly those words, which was unusual for Elaine, who tended to stay in the lane of legal analysis rather than moral assessment. I know, Lucian said. I know you know, she said. I'm saying it anyway, he let her. Rafe's cooperation, once offered, was extensive. Whatever Lucian had expected from Rafe's revised statement, it was more thorough than that, either from guilt or from the calculation that thoroughness was the better protection, or from some combination that Rafe himself probably couldn't have sorted out. What it produced, combined with what Lucian had provided, was a picture of an organization that was less a criminal empire than an accumulation of convenient decisions, each one small enough to be rationalized, collectively large enough to be a serious problem. Lucian's attorney characterized his position, in the final assessment, as cooperating's principle with substantial voluntary disclosure and demonstrated intent to remediate, which was attorney language for, you built it, you're accountable, you told us about it before we found you, and that matters. It mattered to the degree it mattered. It didn't erase 11 years. He hadn't expected it to. He saw Nora for the first time in 3 weeks on a Tuesday afternoon in December. Not planned, or not entirely planned, they'd texted the previous week. A conversation that had started with her, asking how things were progressing and had gone on longer than either of them acknowledged it was going on. And at the end of it, he'd said he'd be near her neighborhood Tuesday if she wanted coffee. And she'd said she had a thing with Maisie's school at 3, but she could do 11. And he'd said 11 worked. The coffee place she picked was small, and not the kind of place he usually went, the kind of neighborhood spot with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and a dog asleep near the door, whose presence nobody seemed to find remarkable. He got there at 10:55 because arriving late felt like the wrong signal, and arriving very early felt like the wrong pressure. And he sat at a table near the window with a regular coffee and his coat on the chair beside him, and waited. She came in at 11:02. She was wearing a coat he hadn't seen before, dark red, not as formal as the green dress, something she'd actually chosen for a Tuesday morning, and she had her hair different from the restaurant, less arranged, more like a person going to get coffee, and less like a person who'd spent time in front of a mirror, telling herself things that weren't true. She saw him and walked directly to the table, without the pause he'd half expected, the moment of recalculation, and sat down with the efficiency of someone who had made the decision before she walked through the door at Halpe, and wasn't revisiting it. "You look tired," she said. "I am tired," he said. Good tired or bad tired? He thought about it. The kind that comes from doing something. She looked at him for a moment. The full, direct look she had not suspicious, just thorough. The look of a woman who had spent years learning to read situations accurately, because reading them accurately was a survival skill. "How's it going?" she said. Actually, he told her actually. He'd gotten used to that she didn't want the managed version, and he'd stopped offering it to her sometime around the second week, when he'd realized that the managed version didn't land with her anyway. She'd just waited past it for the real thing. He told her about the Gary dissolution, about Gerald Fitch, about the shape of what the next year was going to look like, the legal process, which was long, and the business restructuring, which was longer, and the specific daily reality of dismantling something you'd spent a decade building, while simultaneously trying to figure out what to build next. "Do you know what comes next?" she asked. "Some of it," he said. "The legitimate businesses remain, restructured. The property holdings, the consulting side, those are real, and they're clean, and they can run without the rest of it." He paused. "It's not nothing. It's actually not nothing. But it's smaller," she said. "It's more honest," he said. "Smaller is relative." She nodded. "I signed the contract," she said. He looked at her. "With the publisher," she said. 2 weeks ago. I've been doing revisions." She paused. He watched her find the word. "It's the strangest thing. The manuscript has been in my head for so long that I know every sentence of it better than I know most things in my life. And then you sent it to someone else, and they read it, and they come back with notes, and some of the notes are wrong, and some of them are so right, it's almost embarrassing. And you sit there and you realize that the thing you've been protecting," she stopped again. "Was ready," he said. "Was ready a year ago," she said. "Maybe 2. She looked at the table for a moment. "I wasn't. And now?" She looked up. "Now I'm terrified and doing it anyway." "That's the only version," he said. "Yeah," she said. "That's what I'm finding out." The dog near the door shifted in its sleep and made a small sound and resettled. Someone at the counter ordered something complicated. The chalkboard creaked when the door opened and let in a draft of December air. "Lucian," she said. "Yeah, what are we doing?" she said. It wasn't accusatory. It was the question asked the way she asked most things directly, because indirection was a thing she'd spent too much of her life wading through to find useful. He looked at her. "I don't know exactly," he said. "I know that I want to find out. I know that whatever this is, it's the first thing in a long time that I'm approaching without a strategy." He paused. "That's uncomfortable. Good uncomfortable or bad uncomfortable," she said, echoing his own answer back at him. He almost smiled. "The kind that comes from something being real." She looked at him for a long moment. "Maisie wants to know if you play miniature golf," she said. He blinked. "What?" she asked me. "Last week. She said the man from the news looked like someone who had never played miniature golf, and she wanted to know if that was true." A pause. I don't know how she concluded that from a Tribune photograph. "She's 9. She's terrifying," he said. "I told you," Nora said. "I don't know if I play miniature golf," he said honestly. "I haven't played since I was a kid. That's not a no." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him with the kind of look that contains a decision. "Saturday," she said. "There's a place near the lake. Maisie will correct your form aggressively and without mercy. That's her thing. She does it to everyone. Okay, he said. It's not, she stopped. I'm not saying Saturday changes anything. I'm saying Saturday is Saturday. I know, he said. Stop saying that, she said. But there was something in her voice that wasn't quite the edge it had carried when she'd said it before. He did almost smile that time. Okay, he said instead. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Outside, December moved through the neighborhood in its particular gray and unhurried way. Inside the coffee shop, the dogs slept. The chalkboard menu listed things in someone's uneven handwriting, and two people sat at a table near the window, not performing anything for anyone. One more thing, she said. Ask it. The night at the restaurant, she said, when you walked in. Before you sat down, she looked at him. Were you afraid? He thought about it. The honest answer, which he'd promised himself, was the only kind he would give her. Not of the situation, he said. Of what you'd think of me once you knew what the situation. She sat with that. That's a human answer, she said. I'm working on that, he said. She looked out the window for a moment. The street, the December light, the ordinary business of a Tuesday in a neighborhood that had nothing to do with restaurant scandals or federal buildings or viral videos or any of the architecture of the last 3 weeks. Just a street, just the city doing what cities do. Thank you, she said. For what? For answering the question in the rain, she said. That night, the one I asked, she looked back at him. Nobody had ever answered it that way before, without trying to make it easier. The truth is easier, he said, in the long run. You didn't know that when you said it, she said. No, he admitted. I just knew I didn't want to lie to you. She nodded. She drank her coffee. He drank his. Saturday arrived cold and bright, the way Chicago Saturdays sometimes do in December, a reprieve, the sky making up for weeks of gray, with a single morning of hard blue light that made everything look sharper than it actually was. The miniature golf place near the lake was called Hal's, and it had been there since the 70s based on the sign and the carpet, and it was the kind of place that had survived because it didn't try to be more than it was. 12 holes, a windmill that didn't fully work anymore, a small snack counter that sold hot chocolate that tasted like the powdered kind and was, for reasons Lucian couldn't entirely explain, exactly right. Maisie was already holding her club before they'd fully paid. She was a precise child, he'd absorbed this, from everything Nora had told him, and confirmed it in the first 4 minutes of being in Maisie's presence. She assessed him when Nora introduced them the way she assessed most things, with her head at a slight angle, and her eyes doing the thorough, unhurried inventory of someone who understood that first impressions contained useful data and wanted to collect it accurately. You're taller than you looked in the newspaper, she said. The photograph was taken from across the street, he said. She considered this. That makes sense, she said, and moved on, which he understood was the successful conclusion of the assessment. She was not interested in making things easier for him on the course. He got that immediately. She offered correction in the direct and unpreambled way of a person who had decided the most respectful thing she could give him was accurate information, which included telling him twice that he was gripping the club wrong, and once that he was standing at the wrong angle, and once, on hole 7, that the way he was approaching the windmill shot suggested he hadn't thought through the geometry. The geometry, he said. The angle, she said, and pointed at the windmill blade, and then at the hole with the precision of a small engineer. If you hit it there, it goes there. You want it to go there. She pointed again. So you have to hit it there. He adjusted his stance. She watched critically. Better, she said. He hit the ball. It went where she'd indicated. He made the hole in 2-2. Maisie nodded with satisfaction. You listened, she said. Mom said you'd listen, but some people say they'll listen, and then they do whatever they were going to do anyway. He looked at Nora over Maisie's head. Nora was watching her daughter, with the expression that she wore. He'd noticed, specifically when Maisie said something that landed not surprise, because Maisie apparently said things like this regularly, but a kind of quiet, accumulated pride that had nothing performative about it. I try to listen, he said to Maisie. It's important, Maisie said, moving toward hole 8. It's how you know what's actually happening, instead of what you think is happening. He followed her. Nora fell into step beside him. She said that to her teacher last month, Nora said quietly, in the context of a disagreement about a homework assignment. A pause. Teacher agreed with her, which I'm not sure set a useful precedent. She was right, though, he said. She usually is, Nora said. That's the terrifying part. They played hole 8. Maisie made it in 1 and looked unsurprised. Nora made it in 3 and looked satisfied. Lucian made it in 4 and made no effort to look like 4 was fewer than 4. You're improving, Maisie said. Slowly, he said. That's fine, she said, slow as honest. He looked at this 9-year-old, standing beside a miniature windmill, in December holding a small golf club. And he thought about what it meant that this was the version of his Tuesday that existed not Michigan Avenue, not Halford, not the gray sedan in his rearview mirror. This. A child telling him that slow was honest. Your mom's book, he said to Maisie. Have you read it? The whole thing, Maisie said. Twice. She looked at him with the assessing look again. Did she tell you about Petra? The girl who hears animals? The girl who hears the truth, Maisie corrected. The animals tell her the truth because animals don't know how to lie. It's not that the people around her are lying on purpose. Most of them just don't know the difference between what's real and what they want to be real. She paused. Mom says that's the most important part. The difference. He looked at Nora. Nora was looking at Maisie with the expression that was becoming one he recognized as specifically hers, the one that looked like being seen from the inside. That is the most important part, Lucian said. Maisie seemed satisfied with this. She moved toward hole 9. After the golf, they walked by the lake. This had been Maisie's suggestion, and it was a good one. The December light was doing the thing it did on the water, making it look both colder and more beautiful than it should. And the path along the lake was nearly empty, which made it feel like the city had offered them something private without being asked. Maisie ran ahead with the inexhaustible energy of a child who has adequately supervised 2 adults through 12 holes of miniature golf and now considers the structured portion of the afternoon concluded. She stayed within sight. Nora tracked her with the peripheral attention that parents develop into something close to a second sense, but far enough ahead that the conversation behind her was its own. Nora walked with her hands in her coat pockets. Lucian walked beside her with the same. The lake moved to their left, gray-blue and enormous, doing what Lake Michigan always does in December, reminding you that it was here before the city and will be here after, and that whatever is happening on any particular Tuesday or Saturday is very small relative to the duration of water. The restaurant, Nora said. He looked at her. Crown Meridian sent me a letter, she said. The manager, handwritten. He apologized for the environment on Friday night, his words, the environment, and offered a complimentary dinner. She paused. I'm not going to go. No, he said. It's a good restaurant, she said. The salmon was excellent, but it's the wrong place for the next thing, he said. She looked at him. Yes, she said, that's exactly it. They walked. Maisie had found something interesting near the water's edge, a piece of driftwood or a rock. It was hard to tell from here and was crouched over it with the total focus of a child who has been redirected by something genuinely interesting. She asked me about her father, Nora said. He didn't say anything. He let it come in whatever direction she decided to send it. Not this week. A few weeks ago. She asked why he didn't come to her school things. She paused. I told her the truth, the age-appropriate version of it. That her father and I were very different people, and that being different, in the specific ways we were different, made it hard to be in the same house. She paused again. She said that made sense, and then she went back to her book. That's her processing, he said. That's her processing, Nora agreed. She does it quietly, and then comes back with the question she actually wanted to ask, which is usually more specific. She looked at the lake. She asked me the next morning if the man from the news was a good person. He looked at her. What did you tell her? He said. She thought about it for a moment, looking at the water. I told her he'd made choices that weren't good, she said, and that he was trying to unmake some of them, and that whether that made him a good person was a question that was still working out. She paused. She said that sounded like something her teacher would say, when she didn't know the answer yet. Smart kid, he said. Terrifying kid, she said. He almost said you said that, but he didn't, because the word she kept using wasn't really about fear, and they both knew it. It was about the specific awe of watching something you made become more than you anticipated. And the word terrifying was the closest Nora had come to describing that in a way that didn't feel too large. I'm not a good person, he said, fully. I'm not going to say I am. I know, she said. Not unkind, just accurate. But he stopped. Found the right words, which for him was always a process that involved discarding several wrong ones first. I'm trying to be something I can account for. That's different from good. Start. She looked at him. The look she gave him was not soft, and it was not hard. It was the look she had, that was simply thorough. The look that said she was taking in what was actually there, rather than what she wanted to be there. And that she was going to work with the accurate version. Okay, she said. Just that. And it was enough because it was real. Maisie came running back from the waterline, with something in her hand, a flat gray stone. Lake smoothie. The kind that skips if you throw it right, and held it up for inspection. It's good, Lucian said. She assessed him, then the stone. Do you know how to skip rocks? I haven't in a long time, he said. That's not a no, she said, which was the same thing her mother had said about miniature golf 3 days ago, and the similarity landed on him. It's like something he hadn't been prepared for. The specific recognition that this is where certain things come from, and where they go. No, he said. It's not. Maisie turned toward the water. Come on then, she said, with the authority of a 9-year-old who has decided the tutorial portion of the afternoon is not yet complete. He looked at Nora. She looked at him with the expression that was becoming familiar, the one that was not quite a smile, but had the elements of one, assembled in a way that was entirely her own, that he had never seen on anyone else, that he was fairly certain he'd remember for the rest of his life, whether things went in any particular direction or not. She's going to correct your form, Nora said. I know, he said. Stop, I know, he said again. And this time, when she looked at him, there was something in both of them that understood the exchange. She had shifted into something that sounded like a complaint, but wasn't. That it was the kind of repetition that means I hear you, and I'm here in the same breath. And that this, too, was a small and ordinary and absolutely real thing between two people who had arrived Tuesday afternoon by the lake through the specific wreckage of a Friday night that was never supposed to end this way. He walked to the water's edge. Maisie demonstrated the grip, the stance, the angle of the wrist. She was precise and unsentimental about it, the same way she was precise and unsentimental about most things. And he adjusted his grip and his stance and the angle of his wrist, and he threw the stone. It skipped 4 times. Maisie held up 4 fingers. Better, she said. He looked back at Nora, standing on the path with her hands in her pockets, and the December light doing that thing it did on Tuesday mornings that made everything look sharper than it actually was. And he thought about all the things that had led to this specific moment, the restaurant, the rain, the phone calls, the federal building, the stone in his hand. And he thought about how none of it was clean, and none of it was easy, and none of it was the version anyone would have planned, and how the thing that was true, dancing beside a lake in December, with a 9-year-old correcting his form, was that the moment was entirely real. Maisie handed him another stone. He took it. Again, she said. He threw it. 5 skips this time. Maisie nodded once, with the satisfaction of a teacher whose student has finally begun to catch up, and turned back to the water to find another stone. And the lake moved the way it always moved, without reference to any of it. Enormous and old and entirely indifferent. And behind him he heard Nora take 1 step closer to the water's edge. Just one. The small, deliberate step of someone who has decided the ground is solid enough to stand on. And it was.